Chapter 2010. These two people are so strong. Everyone was shocked to see the scene in the sky. Both Tsang Lan and Nye Tian's battle prowess exceeded everyone's expectations. This battle was even more exciting than they had expected. Tsang Lan and Nye Tian, one above and one below, their sword momentum surging like a mountain. Both of them were staring at each other with the coldest eyes. Rumble! In the next moment, under the attentive gazes of countless people, the two terrifying sword shadows finally collided with each other. Boundless sword intent surged violently, and the void became oppressive and gloomy as if it would collapse at any moment. Terrifying waves of air rippled out in the sky, as if the whole world was trembling. The power of the sword collision between Nye Tian and Tsang Lan was so great that it was almost as powerful as a battle between peak paramount gods. Everyone was shocked, and they couldn't believe that this was a battle between two young swordsmen. Rumble! Ear-piercing noises could be heard in the air. The two sword shadows collided and devoured each other, trying to destroy each other. However, this kind of power was too terrifying, and it was impossible to determine the winner in an instant. Nye Tian and Tsang Lan's figures were submerged in the endless waves of air. People could only see the sword light, but couldn't see the two of them. The other four people on the sword field were watching, and had no intention of making a move. Phantasm Soul Remnant originally thought that Tsang Lan could easily kill Nye Tian, but who knew that this battle would be so terrifying? Fortunately, Tsang Lan was there, otherwise Phantasm Soul Remnant couldn't be sure that he could kill Nye Tian. After a while, the air waves in the air gradually dissipated, and Nye Tian and Tsang Lan's figures appeared. At this moment, both of them were not in a good state. Nye Tian's body was covered in blood, and he was obviously seriously injured. Tsang Lan's face was pale, and there was a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth. He was also injured. Everyone could see that Nye Tian had been seriously injured in the battle just now. If other swordsmen were to suffer such heavy injuries, it would be difficult for them to even survive, let alone continue fighting. However, Nye Tian had the Earth Vein Source, which could provide him with a powerful life force. As long as it wasn't a fatal injury, he would be able to recover quickly. Although Tsang Lan's injuries were light, his martial physique was not as strong as Nye Tian's and his recovery ability was weak. Therefore, in the confrontation just now, Nye Tian seemed to have suffered a great loss, but in reality, the entire battle situation had turned in his favor. Nye Tian, why are you so strong? Tsang Lan looked at Nye Tian with a gloomy expression, a hint of embarrassment on his face. It was supposed to be an easy battle, but it turned out to be like this. This made Tsang Lan very angry. He was Saint Sword Kanglan. He should have killed Nye Tian with a single slash. How could he have allowed Nye Tian to persist until now and even injure him? Tsang Lan couldn't understand all this. Nye Tian's body trembled and the blood on his body was washed away. The wounds on his body healed at a speed visible to the naked eye. He looked at Tsang Lan and said faintly, "Tsang Lan, didn't you say that I was very funny? Now you should know that the real funny one is you." Damn it. Tsang Lan was provoked and immediately growled. He immediately swung the saint's sword in his hand again, and a huge sword shadow slashed at Nye Tian. Nye Tian was not afraid and also swung his sword. The sword shadow whistled and blocked Tsang Lan's sword. How is this possible? When the crowd saw this, their faces were filled with shock and they cried out in shock. What is Tsang Lan doing? Why is his sword essence getting weaker and weaker? It doesn't seem to be as strong as before. Why is Nye Tian getting stronger and stronger? The crowd was confused. After the fierce battle just now, Tsang Lan's aura had weakened. On the other hand, Nye Tian, who had been seriously injured several times, was getting stronger and stronger. This was too strange. No one could understand what was happening. What was going on? Logically speaking, Nye Tian's strength should be getting weaker and his aura should be getting weaker and weaker. Why was it getting stronger and stronger? No one knew that Nyetian had the Terra vein source in his body, so his life force was very strong. And the reason why Nyetian's aura was getting stronger was not because of others, but because of Tsang Lan. Every time Tsang Lan's sword fell, he would cause serious damage to Nyetian. But at the same time, his sword essence was also absorbed by Nyetian, making the forbidden skill rune in Nyetian's body stronger. At the beginning of the battle, Nyetian noticed that Tsang Lan's sword essence was very strange. It could strengthen the forbidden skill rune in his body. Because of the strengthening of the forbidden skill rune, Nyetian's aura not only did not weaken, but also became stronger and stronger. Nyetian himself did not know why Tsang Lan's sword essence could affect the forbidden skill rune. As for Tsang Lan, it was because his sword essence was absorbed by Nyetian that his aura became weaker. As for Tsang Lan, the gap between Nyetian and Tsang Lan's strength was slowly narrowing. Nyetian even felt that if he absorbed more of Tsang Lan's sword essence, the forbidden skill rune could even be upgraded, and his strength might also increase again. Why can't I kill you? Tsang Lan was completely enraged. He roared and stabbed with his holy sword several times, but all of them were easily blocked by Nyetian. Tsang Lan, it's time for me to fight back. At this time, the corner of Nyetian's mouth curled up slightly, and a strong killing intent flashed in his eyes. Tsang Lan's current attack was no longer a threat to Nyetian. Next, it was time for Nyetian to fight back. As soon as his voice fell, Nyetian slashed with Starlight Heaven Slash. A starlight sword shadow appeared, and like a collapsing mountain, it smashed down on Tsang Lan. Tsang Lan was forced to retreat again and again, looking extremely embarrassed. Nyetian had the upper hand with his sword. He immediately stabbed with his sword, and a terrifying sword light appeared in the air. As Tsang Lan retreated, wounds appeared on his body. His whole body was dripping with blood, and his life was constantly flowing out. What's going on? Am I seeing things? Tsang Lan is actually being beaten by Nyetian to the point where he can't even fight back? The crowd's eyes trembled, and some even suspected that their eyes were playing tricks on them. Tsang Lan's aura is getting weaker and weaker. If this continues, he will be killed by Nyetian. The crowd's view began to change, and the scales of victory were tipping in Nyetian's favor. On the viewing platform high up in the sky, Gongsun Xing and the others were watching with their eyes wide open. Nyetian's reversal was too dramatic, and no one could understand what was going on. At this moment, Nangong Dushio's expression was extremely ugly, and he kept shouting in his heart, "Tsang Lan, you piece of trash, what are you doing? You are a person who can control a sacred sword. How can you not even kill a puny Nyetian?" How could he know that Tsang Lan had already done his best? At this moment, Tsang Lan's mood was on the verge of collapse. Nyetian, who was far weaker than him, had become stronger after being severely injured by him several times. Anyone who encountered such a situation would go crazy. Tsang Lan, prepare to die. At this moment, Nyetian's eyes suddenly turned cold, and his entire body's sword intent instantly surged. Starlight Heaven slashed down from the sky, and a fatal sword shadow appeared, slashing towards Tsang Lan. Chapter 2011. Nyetian could feel that Tsang Lan's aura was getting weaker and weaker. As long as his sword landed, Tsang Lan would definitely die. The terrifying and deadly sword shadow descended from the sky, and Tsang Lan felt an immense pressure. His eyes narrowed as he sensed a genuine killing intent, and he could smell the arrival of death. He had never dreamed that he would die at the hands of Nyetian. However, just as the fatal sword strike was about to land, Nyetian's murderous eyes suddenly changed. They became dull and lifeless. In an instant, the sword shadow in the sky lost its support and weakened instantly. Huh? What's going on? Tsang Lan was taken aback by the sudden turn of events, but he reacted quickly and blocked the fatal sword strike with his sword. Song Lan steadied himself and saw that Nye Tian was standing still like a piece of wood. His eyes were dull and lifeless. Everyone was stunned when they saw this scene. They did not know what had happened to Nye Tian. What's wrong with Nye Tian? He had the chance to kill Song Lan. Why did he stop? It's such a great opportunity to kill Song Lan, but Nye Tian stopped. What a pity. Look, something's wrong with Nye Tian. He doesn't have any aura at all. It's as if he's being controlled. He was being controlled. At this moment, Nye Tian was indeed being controlled. And the person controlling him was none other than the other swordsman on the sword field, the evil soul remnant. The phantasm soul had long since realized that Nye Tian's psychic power and soul were far stronger than that of an ordinary person's, and that he had an incomparably tough temperament. Furthermore, he had sensed the existence of the divine patterns. Therefore, even if he used his illusory sword intent on Nye Tian, the chances of success wouldn't be very high. The evil soul remnant did not make a move when Nye Tian and Song Lan were fighting because he was waiting for a suitable opportunity. When Nye Tian was preparing to kill Song Lan just now, all his attention was focused on Song Lan. He did not care about the evil soul's remnant life, so he fell into the illusion of the evil soul. Song Lan, what are you waiting for? Hurry up and kill him. At this time, the voice of the evil soul sounded, urging Song Lan to kill Nye Tian. At this moment, Nye Tian was being controlled by the evil soul's remnant life. He had no defense at all, and his martial body was also in a relaxed state. A casual swing of Song Lan's sword would be enough to kill him. Song Lan was taken aback for a moment before he reacted. The corners of his mouth curled into a cold smile. Sword aura rose from his body, and he slashed at Nye Tian in a frenzy. Despicable! At this moment, another voice rang out, and a sword shadow appeared, blocking Song Lan's fatal attack for Nye Tian. The figure flickered and stood in front of Nye Tian. It was none other than Xianyuan Yunsong. Although Xianyuan Yunsong did not like Nye Tian, he remembered that he was on the same side as Nye Tian. Moreover, he could not bear to see the evil soul remnant and Song Lan working together to kill Nye Tian. Xianyuan Yunsong had thought that it was just an accident that he had lost to Nye Tian on the sword stone. However, after the fierce battle just now, he realized that Nye Tian's strength was far beyond his own, and that Nye Tian could even kill him within a second. He could not believe that Nye Tian could be so powerful. Get lost! Song Lan roared when he saw Xianyuan Yunsong standing in front of him. He struck out with his sword, but it was still blocked by Xianyuan Yunsong. Song Lan's strength was, of course, far superior to Xianyuan Yunsong. However, he was seriously injured, so it was difficult for him to deal with Xianyuan Yunsong. Nye Tian, is it? If that's the case, then let me kill you. At this moment, another voice rang out. Immediately after, a fierce sword intent whizzed out, morphed into a sword shadow, and shot towards Nye Tian. This sword shadow was as cold as ice, and wherever it passed through the void, many icicles appeared. You are not a good person to make a move at this time. Almost at the same time, a clear voice sounded, and then a crimson sword essence gushed out, turned into a shield in the air, and wrapped around Nye Tian. Bang! The cold sword shadow landed on the crimson shield, and after a muffled sound, it broke into pieces. Little girl, I don't want to kill women, you'd better get out of my way. Fenghua Bing Hong looked at Cher with murderous eyes and said coldly. The person who wanted to kill Nye Tian was Fenghua Bing Hong. Originally, he didn't have any grudges with Nye Tian, but he felt something from Nye Tian, and that was a threat. Because of this threat, he wanted to kill Nye Tian. Fenghua Bing Hong was already a genius in sword principle, but compared to Nye Tian, he was still a long way off. He didn't allow people who were better than him to exist, so he wanted to kill Nye Tian. Unfortunately, Fenghua Bing Hong's fatal sword was blocked by Cher. In fact, Cher wanted to make a move earlier, but Xianyuan Yunsong was one step ahead of her. You don't want to kill me, but I want to kill you, Cher smiled coldly, and her whole body was like an iceberg, releasing a cold chi. She didn't know why, but there was an impulse in her heart, and she had to protect Nie Tian. If that's the case, then don't blame me. Feng Hua Bing Hong's eyes darkened, and his whole body's sword essence burst out. Suddenly, a layer of frost appeared in the sky, and the space became bone-chilling. It's a boundary. The evil soul remnant felt the sword pressure coming from the space, and immediately reacted. Feng Hua Bing Hong opened a sword will boundary. Little girl, I'll give you one last chance, back off. Feng Hua Bing Hong said coldly, as if he really didn't want to kill the woman. But Cher didn't give in at all and said, You want to scare me off with a small sword will boundary? Ridiculous. Cher had the meridians of 3 lives, so she was not afraid of any boundary. Moreover, she was wearing the Emperor of Hell Saint garment, so she was not affected by Feng Hua Bing Hong's boundary. Feng Hua Bing Hong opened the boundary with the intention of scaring Cher off, but he didn't expect to be ridiculed, which made him very angry. Since you want to die, then don't blame me. Feng Hua Bing Hong's eyes darkened, and he suddenly stabbed out with his long sword. Suddenly, a cold chi appeared, and turned into a huge icicle, blasting towards Cher. Cher wasn't afraid at all. Her figure moved, and the fallen god's sword stabbed out. The sword will surged out like 1,000 feet of red, and blocked Feng Hua Bing Hong's sword. The Windfire Iceman was much more powerful than Shui, but his level of swordsmanship was weaker than Shui's. Furthermore, Shui was wearing the mysterious underworld emperor's sacred robe, so the two of them were evenly matched. Xianyuan Yunsong blocked Songlan, and Cher blocked Feng Hua Bing Hong. The battle seemed to be at a stalemate. Looks like I have to do it myself. However, at this time, the evil soul remnant sneered, and the corner of his mouth rose into a cold smile, and his eyes were full of killing intent. He didn't want to do it, but now he had no choice but to kill Nie Tian himself. Nie Tian was hit by his sword of incubus, and had lost the ability to resist. To him, Nie Tian was a piece of fat meat on the chopping board, ready to be slaughtered. Chapter 2012. The evil soul remnant had a sinister smile on its face. The black sword in its hand released an extremely cold aura as it walked towards Nie Tian step by step. Not good. That guy is going to attack Nie Tian. When the crowd saw the scene in the sky, their eyes violently trembled and they cried out in alarm. Nie Tian was currently under the evil soul remnant's sword intent illusion and could not retaliate at all. If the evil soul remnant wanted to kill him, he could only obediently accept his death. Everyone's nerves were stretched taut at this moment. They did not even dare to breathe loudly. Gongsun Xingji, Guiwu Kwangsha, and the others' hearts jumped to their throats as they looked at the evil soul remnant with trembling eyes. They were worried about Nie Tian's situation. Although Nie Tian was at the juncture of life and death, Gongsun Xingji and Guiwu Kwangsha could not save him because he was currently on the sword stage. No one could intervene in the battle. Jiang Lai and Nangong Duxiu also stared at Nie Tian and the evil soul remnant with blazing eyes. They were clearly looking forward to the scene where the evil soul remnant would kill Nie Tian with a single sword strike. On the sword stage, the evil soul remnant was less than 100 meters away from Nie Tian. Its pair of malicious eyes released a cold and gloomy aura and heavy killing intent. At the same time, inside Nie Tian's spiritual sense space, he felt like he had fallen into a swamp. The more he struggled, the deeper he sank. Illusion, the evil soul remnant's sword intent created an extremely terrifying illusion that completely controlled Nie Tian's spiritual sense. Nie Tian, wake up! At this time, Fat Cat was desperately shouting, but his voice could not affect Nie Tian's spiritual sense at all. Nie Tian's eyes were dazed. He stood in the same place with a lifeless expression. His figure was like a withered leaf in a gale that could wither at any time. Damn it! The little fat cat sensed the impending danger and could not help but let out a low growl. Its blue eyes flickered as it hardened its heart and said, "Nye Tian, this is the last way to save you. I can only say sorry." As soon as it finished speaking, the fat cat's body moved, and 6 tails stretched out from its back. Furthermore, these 6 tails were growing larger and larger as they spread through the air. It turned out that fat cat had grown a 6th tail. "Nye Tian, I'm stirring up huge waves in the Fiend God Ocean to attack your Fiend God nascent embryo. I'm using this method to awaken you." The fat cat thought to itself. Immediately, its 6 tails, like 6 giant snakes, plunged deep into the sea of demons and gods, stirring wildly. In the sea of gods and demons, monstrous waves rose as the power of gods and demons was released in the origin embryo space, wreaking havoc. At the same time, Nye Tian was attacked. He suddenly felt a sharp pain in his body. Puff! At this moment, his body couldn't help but tremble, and then he spat out a mouthful of blood. It was also at this moment that his dull eyes regained their clarity, releasing a bright light. At the same time, a black blade attacked from the void. Its aura wasn't strong, but it was extremely swift and fierce, with strong killing intent. Nye Tian suddenly felt the killing intent, and almost instinctively, a majestic star force surged out, and a starlight shield appeared around his body. Bang! In the next instant the sword shadow fell, heavily smashing on the starlight shield. Nye Tian's body was directly sent flying, leaving a bloody trail in the air. Nye Tian. Cher was fighting with wind, fire, and ice. When she saw Nye Tian being sent flying, she couldn't help but cry out, "Little girl, you dare to be distracted while fighting with me!" Feng Huabing sneered and slashed out with his sword. A huge icicle appeared in the void. Outside the icicle, there was a layer of frightening flame aura surging. Cher was stunned for a moment, and her reaction was slightly slow. She was immediately hit by the icicle, and her figure was sent flying. Her figure was still in midair, and a majestic sword intent surged out behind her. The blood-red sword intent condensed into a pair of wings, and she immediately stabilized her body. "Huh!" Wind, Fire, and Ice frowned when he saw this, and he said in surprise, "What is that black robe you're wearing? It can actually block my Ice Flame sword intent." The sword intent that Wind, Fire, and Ice cultivated was called the Ice Flame sword intent. It was very powerful, and it was a kind of sword intent that had both ice and fire attribute. Ice and fire were originally 2 extreme attributes, but they could be merged into one in Wind, Fire, and Ice's sword intent, allowing his sword intent to have both the coldness of ice and the heat of fire at the same time. If an ordinary martial artist was hit by the Ice Flame sword intent, they would have to endure the torment of both ice and fire. With Wind, Fire, and Ice's current strength, a single sword strike was enough to threaten a late-stage Paramount God, and any martial artist below the mid-stage Paramount God level could basically be killed with a single strike. But his sword strike just now had struck Cher head-on, and she wasn't injured at all. It was too strange. He could see that the reason Cher could resist the Ice Flame sword intent head-on wasn't because of her strong martial body, but because of the black robe she was wearing. It was that black robe that had blocked most of the Ice Flame sword intent's attack for Cher. Otherwise, she would have been seriously injured, if not dead. How can a mere Ice Flame sword intent break through the power of the Saint Garment? Cher replied coldly, steadying her body. She was wearing the Underworld Emperor's sacred robe, which was a true sacred tool. Even though she couldn't unleash the full power of the Underworld Emperor's sacred robe, it was more than enough to resist the Ice Flame sword essence of wind, fire, and ice. "Are you all right, Nye Tian?" At this moment, Shui turned to look at Nye Tian, and she couldn't help but be surprised to find that he had regained his soul awareness. "I'm fine." Nye Tian steadied himself and smiled faintly. Even though he was covered in blood, his eyes were filled with an intense desire to fight. "This is impossible." Across from Nye Tian, Phantasm Remnant couldn't help but shriek, "How did you break through my nightmare sword?" Never in his wildest dreams could he have imagined that Nyetian would be able to wake up from the nightmare sword. That was something that had never happened before. Phantasm Remnant was most proud of his nightmare sword. Even a peak paramount god would have a hard time waking up from it. He had even used the incubus sword to kill a peak paramount god. However, Nyetian was only an early paramount god, and yet he had broken through the nightmare sword in such a short time. It was simply too bizarre. Phantasm Remnant, it's time for you and me to fight, Nye Tianling said with a cold smile, his eyes flashing with killing intent. But as soon as he took a step forward and activated his key meridians, his face fell. What's going on? My key meridians are injured? Nye Tian, just now, in order to wake you up from the illusion, I forcefully attacked your fiend god nascent embryo. As a result, your key meridians were also attacked, and you suffered some injuries. The little fat cat's voice sounded out, explaining. When Fat Cat had woken up Nye Tian, it had not only attacked his fiend god nascent embryo, but also his key meridians. Nye Tian's eyes flickered. Things weren't looking good for him. Even with the Earthstring essence, he couldn't instantly heal the damage to his key meridians. Chapter 2013. Realizing that his Yuan meridians were injured, Nye Tian's expression changed, and he became worried. His Yuan meridians were not greatly affected, but the Godfiend origin embryo was attacked, and he was unable to use the Godfiend sword intent. The Godfiend sword intent was one of Nye Tian's strongest trump cards. If he could not use it, his battle power would be greatly reduced. The evil soul remnant life was very cautious, and it perfectly captured the change in Nye Tian's expression. It was puzzled, and it did not know what had happened to Nye Tian. On the viewing platform, Gongsun Xing saw that Nye Tian had woken up from the illusion, and he finally relaxed. However, Jiang Lai and Nangong Dushou's expressions were extremely unsightly. They were even more worried that Nye Tian had not died in such a situation. Time and time again, Nye Tian's performance had amazed them, but it also made them feel fearful and threatened. Nye Tian was too terrifying, and he was slowly subverting Jiang Lai and the others' understanding of the martial Tao. As one of the apex experts of the 9 major domains, Jiang Lai had seen countless outstanding people, but none of them could compare to Nye Tian. Nye Tian, your Godfiend origin embryo has been attacked, and it is very unstable. If you continue to fight, you might cause fatal damage to the Godfiend origin embryo. Fat Cat reminded Nye Tian. Nye Tian frowned, and he said solemnly, I have already come this far, how can I back out? At this stage in the Evil Edge sword competition, Nye Tian had even defeated Sacred Sword Kanglin. He would not be willing to back out now. He could ignore the position of Sword Chief, but he could not ignore Jianqingqi's life and death. He had agreed with Jiang Lai that he could only obtain the Ink Jade Dragon Sword if he obtained the position of Sword Chief. Therefore, Nye Tian could not give up at this time. Even if he had to risk injuring his Godfiend origin embryo, he had to continue fighting. Fat Cat's expression was tense. He knew Nye Tian's character very well. Even at the very last moment, he would never admit defeat. After thinking for a moment, Fat Cat said to Nye Tian, finish this quickly. Nye Tian could not maintain his current state for much longer. If the talisman within him ran out of energy and his strength returned to early overgod, there really would be no hope at all. Nye Tian, I admit that your strength has exceeded my expectations, but you can't win this battle. The evil soul remnant cold spoke, and then a terrifying sword aura surged from its body. Waves of black sword intent spread out, causing the surrounding space to darken. Wretch Soul Discarnate was a mid-paramount god, and had mastered the art of sword and martial arts. Therefore, even if his nightmare sword couldn't kill Nye Tian, he was confident that he could defeat Nye Tian. Furthermore, he could sense that Nye Tian's aura was very weak, and that he had sustained significant injuries. If he still couldn't kill Nye Tian under these circumstances, then he would be the leader of the 13 reverse scale spikes. Without the slightest hesitation, the evil soul remnant stabbed out with his wretch soul sword, creating a black image that looked like an enormous black serpent that lunged toward Nyetian. Frowning, Nyetian unleashed the starry heaven slash, sending sword light shooting out thousands of meters in all directions. Rumble! Two sword shadows collided in the void, emitting a violent rumble. Heaven and earth turned solemn, and the weather changed. Nyetian was sent tumbling backwards several thousand meters, coughing up a mouthful of blood. His vital meridians were injured, and every time he tried to circulate them, his martial body would be severely damaged. Even the regenerative powers of the Earthstring essence couldn't heal him instantly. Not being able to use the Fiend God's sword intent also weakened Nyetian's battle prowess. He was at a great disadvantage in a head-on clash with the evil soul remnant. Nyetian, you're already an arrow at the end of its flight. Just accept your death. The evil soul remnant sneered, and its aura became even more violent. The wretch soul sword stirred up waves of sword intent in the air as it bombarded toward Nyetian. Nyetian was forced to retreat again and again. Glaring wounds appeared on his body, and blood gushed out from all over his body. But Nyetian was able to stand firm every time, and the look in his eyes didn't change in the slightest. They were as sharp and determined as ever. Nyetian, let's see how much longer you can hold out. The evil soul remnant had the upper hand, and its sword came down again and again. Nyetian could only take the beating without being able to fight back. The injuries on his body worsened, and the air was filled with the stench of blood. The crowd couldn't help but be shocked at the tragic scene in the sky. They weren't shocked by the evil soul remnant's strength, but by Nyetian's tenacity. Nyetian is really too strong. If it weren't for the evil soul remnant, he would have killed Kanglin's sacred sword by now. Now that he's fighting the evil soul remnant, he can still hold out until now. How terrifying! I thought Kanglin was strong, but it turns out that Nyetian is even stronger than him. Even if Nyetian can't beat the evil soul remnant now, he's definitely the most terrifying person in the top 8. Why does Nyetian still want to fight? If he admits defeat now, he can still keep his life. If he continues, he'll definitely be killed by the evil soul remnant. Could it be that Nyetian is fighting for the Ink Jade Dragon Sword? That's too stupid. Although the Ink Jade Dragon Sword is good, he can't lose his life for it. The crowd discussed among themselves, and they couldn't understand why Nyetian was still fighting. But now, they all understood that the most terrifying person in the top 8 wasn't Kanglin's sacred sword, but Nyetian. Even if Nyetian was being suppressed by the evil soul remnant, his battle prowess was recognized by everyone. Nyetian, die. The evil soul remnant's sword slashed down again and again, but Nyetian still stood there. Even though his aura was weak, he was still alive. This made the evil soul remnant even more furious, and his expression became even more vicious. Nyetian was barely holding on, and his eyes were bloodshot, but he was still as resolute and fierce as ever. The evil soul remnant was strong, but he, Nyetian, would never admit defeat even at the last moment. Nyetian! Cher couldn't help exclaiming when she sensed Nyetian's aura weakening. But her strength wasn't strong enough, and she could only barely block Feng Huabinghong's attack. Little girl, this is the second time you've been distracted. Don't blame me for this. At the same time, Feng Huabinghong's voice resounded, and he slashed out with his sword. Instantly, a chilling aura swept over, covering the sky and covering the earth. Shui raised her sword in an attempt to block the attack. However, she suddenly felt the space around her sinking down. Then, her body was actually frozen solid. Even if I can't kill you, I can still control you. Feng Huabinghong sneered. His attack wasn't to kill Cher, but to control her. Then, Feng Huabinghong's gaze turned to Nyetian, and his eyes revealed undisguised murderous intent. Nyetian was simply too powerful. The wind flame ice magnanimity had made up their minds to kill him. Chapter 2014. Nye Tian was already struggling under the frenzied attacks of the evil soul remnant. Now that ice, wind, fire, and ice were attacking him, he was in a life-and-death crisis. Be careful! The crowd couldn't help but shriek when they saw the huge sword shadow descending on Nye Tian. Nye Tian was already in a very dangerous situation. If he were to face the full power of wind, fire, and ice, he would be seriously injured even if he didn't die. Nye Tian. Frozen, Shui let out a cry of alarm upon seeing that Nye Tian was in danger. However, there was nothing she could do, and could only watch helplessly. Nye Tian's eyes were gloomy, and his brain was working quickly. At this moment, between life and death, he had several choices to save his life. The safest method was to let Sakura come out and block the fatal sword strike of wind, fire, and ice for him. Among the opponents that Nye Tian was facing, Song Lan was no longer a threat. He was always entangled by Xianyuan Yunsong. The Wind, Fire, Ice Great Elder and the Phantasm Soul Remnant were his greatest threats. Both of them were extremely powerful, and any one of them had the strength to fight Nye Tian head-on when he was at his peak. Not to mention that the two of them were teaming up to fight Nye Tian, who was in an extremely poor state. Although they were strong, they were still a little weak compared to Sakura. As long as Sakura appeared, he could easily kill wind, fire, and ice and the evil soul remnant. But Nye Tian couldn't do that because it was against the rules of the Evil Edge Sword Conference. If it was a normal fight, Nye Tian could let Sakura come out. But this was a competition and Sakura was another person. He couldn't interfere. Among the 9 superbs, there was not only Sakura, but also Jinan. But Jinan wasn't strong enough now. Even if he came out, he couldn't block wind, fire, and ice's sword. At this moment, there was only one way for Nye Tian, and that was to release his primordial spirit, the 9 superbs Chaos Beast. The 9 superbs Chaos Beast was Nye Tian's last trump card. His 9 dragon veins were injured, and even if he used them, he wouldn't be able to unleash his full strength. As such, he could only use his Yuan spirit. Originally, Nye Tian had not intended to use his primordial spirit. This was because the 9th extreme Chaos Beast was too powerful. Once he released it, it would definitely cause a huge commotion. But now, he had to use it. Little 9, come out. With this thought in mind, the corners of Nye Tian's mouth moved slightly. Soon after, circular scarlet-red halos were released from his body, spreading in all directions in the void. Roar! In the next moment, a 1,000-meter-long crimson beast appeared behind Nye Tian. It let out a furious roar, and its terrifying aura shook the heavens and earth. This is... The moment the 9th extreme Chaos Beast appeared, everyone's eyes widened, and they all sucked in a breath of cold air. They could feel their souls trembling. The 9th extreme Chaos Beast was too terrifying. It stood tall in the sky like a peerless emperor, ruling over a piece of heaven and earth. The 9th extreme Chaos Beast was like a dictator, its fiery eyes sweeping across everything, looking down on everything. Boom! At this time, the Wind Fire Ice Great's sword landed directly on the 9th extreme Chaos Beast. However, the sword shadow collapsed directly, and it did not cause any damage to the 9th extreme Chaos Beast at all. The Wind Fire Ice Great was forced back thousands of meters by the impact. After he stabilized himself, he looked at the Crimson Beast in a daze. He did not dare to believe the scene in front of him at all. He could not believe that Nye Tian would actually release his primordial spirit at this time. The primordial spirit was an existence that was almost like a burden to a god-state martial artist. However, in the hands of Nye Tian, it could actually be so strong. Nye Tian moved his body and stepped on the head of the 9th extreme Chaos Beast. He looked at the Wind Fire Ice Great and the remnant of the evil soul with a cold, murderous look. At this time, everyone present was in an uproar. Their trembling eyes showed how shocked they were. Who would have thought that Nye Tian's biggest trump card was the primordial spirit? It was simply unimaginable that a martial artist's primordial spirit could be so terrifying. On the viewing platform high above, Gongsun Xingji, Guiwu Kuangsha, Jiang Lai, Nangong Duxiu, Xian Zongfeng, and the other martial artists were all staring blankly. No words could express the shock in their hearts. Nie Tian was really different. Every time he was in the most dangerous situation, he would always surprise everyone. The appearance of the ninth extreme chaos beast could only be described as shocking. Your primordial spirit, how can it be so strong? The wind-fire ice great was extremely shocked, and his voice was trembling. Nie Tianling smiled coldly. He did not say anything. Instead, he used his actions to answer. Nie Tian took a step forward, and the huge body of the ninth extreme chaos beast began to run wildly. Suddenly, heaven and earth shook and the void trembled. The wind-fire ice great and the remnant of the evil soul felt the strong aura coming towards them. Their faces instantly became filled with fear. Immediately they attacked at the same time. Two frightening sword shadows flew towards the ninth extreme chaos beast. The ninth extreme chaos beast was like a burning mountain. It was not afraid at all. It rushed forward, and the two sword shadows were actually shattered by the impact. The ninth extreme chaos beast's body was extremely strong. Previously, when Nie Tian fought the former president of the Holy Parliament, Wu Qianqiu, this was proven. It seemed like after the ninth extreme chaos beast absorbed the power of chaos, its body became stronger and stronger. Nie Tian estimated that the ninth extreme chaos beast could now fight with a peak stage supreme god. It was precisely because the ninth extreme chaos beast was too shocking that Nie Tian would not release it unless it was a life-and-death situation. The wind-fire ice great and the remnant of the evil soul saw this scene in front of them. Only then did they realize the strength of the ninth extreme chaos beast. Immediately, their figures moved, and they retreated frantically. Trying to escape? Nie Tianling laughed. The ninth extreme chaos beast immediately spread its scarlet-red wings, and it looked like two rays of sunset light were falling. Roar! The ninth extreme chaos beast roared angrily. Its wings shook, and like a huge ball of flames, it rushed forward crazily. Ah! The wind-fire ice great and the remnant of the evil soul did not expect that not only was the ninth extreme chaos beast's body strong, but its speed was also extremely fast. They immediately screamed, and their faces turned pale. Unfortunately, it was already too late. The ninth extreme chaos beast waved its huge claws, and instantly, two scarlet-red lights appeared, like pillars of fire, and shot out. Bam! Bam! Two muffled sounds rang out almost at the same time. The wind-fire ice great and the remnant of the evil soul were directly sent flying, leaving two bloody trails in the air. Following that, an even more shocking scene appeared. In mid-air, the remnant of the evil soul's body suddenly trembled, and it actually directly exploded, collapsing into a pool of blood. Dead. The remnant of the evil soul was dead. The ninth extreme chaos beast had only used one palm, and the remnant of the evil soul had died tragically on the spot. The remnant of the evil soul, the leader of the 13 reverse scale thorns, would have never dreamed that he would actually be killed by a palm of the ninth extreme chaos beast. When Nie Tian saw this scene, he could not help but narrow his eyes. He could not help but feel a little strange. It seemed like the martial body of the remnant of the evil soul was much weaker than he had imagined. On the other side, the wind-fire ice great, whose entire body was dripping with blood, struggled to stand in mid-air. His face was beyond shocked, and he was looking at Nie Tian in disbelief. Chapter 2015. Nie Tian stared blankly for a few seconds before coming back to his senses. Then, he looked at the wind-fire ice Grand Elder. He only had 3 opponents. Song Lan had no more strength to fight, and the evil soul remnant had died mysteriously. Now only Windfire Ice Great was left. The reason why the evil soul remnant had died mysteriously was because Nie Tian felt that the former's martial body should not be so weak. He had actually been killed by the ninth extreme chaos beast with one slap. However, he did not have time to think too much. He still had an enemy that he had not finished off. Windfire Ice Great had suffered a slap from the ninth extreme chaos beast. He was injured, but it was not fatal. He still had the strength to fight. At this moment, Windfire Ice Great was looking at Nyetian in horror. The shock in his heart was revealed on his face. He had never imagined that Nyetian's primordial spirit was so strong. Not only him, but the others were also shocked by the scene in front of them. The primordial spirit that was originally abandoned by a god-state martial artist had actually become such a strong monster in Nyetian's body. Who exactly was Nyetian? Why did he have so many unimaginable things on him? Windfire Ice Great, you have one chance to admit defeat. Nyetian took a step forward and landed on the ninth extreme chaos beast. He stared at Windfire Ice Great with murderous eyes. Windfire Ice Great wanted to kill Nyetian and even share. Originally, based on Nyetian's character, he would definitely not hesitate to kill this person. However, he was willing to give Windfire Ice Great a chance to admit defeat. It was considered giving face to Guiwu Kwangsha. Thinking about it, Windfire Ice Great was Guiwu Kwangsha's grand disciple. With this layer of relationship, Nyetian would only suppress his killing intent. However, if Windfire Ice Great did not appreciate it, then he could not blame Nyetian. Windfire Ice Great's eyes trembled. He hesitated for a moment and finally spat out 3 words. I admit defeat. Although he still had a certain amount of combat strength, his strength was too weak in front of the ninth extreme chaos beast. The Windfire Ice Great Beast had seen and experienced the might of a 9th-level chaos beast with his own eyes. The evil soul remnant that had died tragically just now was an example. He did not want to be the second evil soul remnant. Windfire Ice Greatness, you're not that stupid. Nyetian's mouth twitched a little when he heard Windfire Ice Great admit defeat. He said in a cold tone. Then, he turned to Song Lan and asked cold, what about you? Song Lan steadied himself. His face instantly turned pale. He spat out 2 words with difficulty, I admit defeat. With Song Lan's current strength, he couldn't even defeat Xianyuan Yunsong. How could he fight against Nyetian? No matter how unwilling he was, he didn't dare to make an enemy out of Nyetian. The fact that Nyetian had given him a chance to admit defeat was already a great mercy. Song Lan dodged to the side and looked at Nyetian in horror. His eyes were filled with fear and dread. Before the real battle with Nyetian, he had always thought that the latter was a piece of trash that could be killed at will. But now, he finally understood that Nyetian's strength had far surpassed his understanding of martial arts. Cher also broke free from the Sword Will Ice Wall's control at this time. She looked at Nyetian with some doubt, but didn't say anything. Windfire, Ice Majestic, and Song Lan directly admitted defeat. This caused the crowd to be stunned, and their faces were incomparably astonished. No one had expected that this battle royale of the top 8 would have such an ending. Since Windfire, Ice, and Song Lan admitted defeat, it was basically confirmed that Nyetian would be the sword champion of this evil-edge sword duel. Cher and Xianyuan Yunsong were on Nyetian's side, so of course they wouldn't fight with Nyetian for the position of sword chief. No one could accept such a dramatic result for a while. At this time, Nyetian took a step forward and stood at the center of the sword field. He raised his head to look at the viewing platform in the sky and said loudly, Divine Sword Master, it's time to announce the results of the Battle Royale of the top 8. Gongsun Xingji's eyes trembled, and only then did he react. His face was filled with ecstasy. The scene that just happened was like a dream to him, and he still couldn't react until now. Gongsun Xingji's figure moved and appeared in front of the crowd. He glanced at Cher and the others and said loudly, Shuling, Xianyuan Yunsong, if the 2 of you have no objections, the sword champion of this evil-edged sword duel will be Nye Tian's. Yes. Cher nodded. She had no intention of fighting with Nye Tian for the position of sword chief. She participated in the evil-edged sword duel for another matter. I have no objections. Xianyuan Yunsong naturally had no objections. At this moment, he already understood the gap between him and Nye Tian. Very well. Gongsun Xingji laughed loudly and said, in that case, I, as the divine sword master of the Xinwu Sword Pagoda, will announce that the sword champion of this evil-edged sword duel is Nye Wait. Just as Gongsun Xingji was about to finish his last word, a cold voice interrupted him. Gongsun Xingji's face darkened. He turned around and saw that the person who stopped him was none other than Jiang Lai. He frowned and asked coldly, Alliance Master Jiang, what do you mean by this? Gongsun Xingji didn't know what grudges there were between Jiang Lai and Nye Tian, but he could tell that Jiang Lai had been targeting Nye Tian ever since he showed up. He was even trying to kill Nye Tian. He wasn't an idiot. He had already guessed that Jiang Lai had come to the evil-edged sword duel because of Nye Tian. Brother Gongsun, before you announce the sword champion, I have some questions to ask you. Jiang Lai's lips curled up into an evil smile. Is the evil-edged sword duel a competition between swordsmen? Gongsun Xingji was surprised. He didn't know what Jiang Lai was up to, but he still nodded and said, the evil-edged sword duel is a grand gathering of swordsmen. Every swordsman in the 9 realms knows that. At this time, Nye Tian also frowned, a faint trace of worry growing in his heart. That's right. Jiang Lai smiled again and said, since the evil-edged sword duel is a contest between swordsmen, if one person defeats the others, but he doesn't use his cultivation in the way of the sword, but some other power, is that appropriate? Gongsun Xingji frowned even more. How could he not tell that the person Jiang Lai was talking about was Nye Tian? Alliance head Jiang, just say what you want to say. Don't beat around the bush, Gongsun Xingji said coldly. He didn't want to waste time with Jiang Lai. Divine Sword Master, what I want to say is that Nye Tian didn't use his swordsman's power to defeat Windfire, Ice, and the others. He used some other power. Since the evil-edged sword duel is a grand gathering of swordsmen, it naturally has to focus on swordsman's strength. Since Nye Tian didn't use his swordsman's power, what right does he have to be the sword champion? What qualifications does he have to be the sword leader? Jiang Lai's face instantly darkened as his powerful voice resounded in everyone's ears. Gongsun Xingji and Nye Tian stilled at the same time. They finally understood that Jiang Lai was questioning Nye Tian's qualifications to be the sword champion. There was no doubt that Nye Tian had not used his swordsman's strength to defeat Windfire, Ice, and the others. But was it reasonable to deny Nye Tian's qualifications to be the sword champion just because of this? Of course, such a statement was unreasonable. Chapter 2016. Jiang Lai's questioning of Nye Tian's qualification to be the sword chieftain caused the atmosphere to fall into a deathly stifling silence. Everyone held their breaths and did not speak. Their eyes flickered as though they were waiting for a great show to begin. Everyone had thought that the Evil Peak sword duel would end after the quarterfinals, but now it seemed like the real show was just about to begin. Jiang Lai's words sounded awkward, but if one thought about it carefully, it seemed to make some sense. A duel between swordsmen naturally had to focus on the strength of the sword Dao. But most people knew that Jiang Lai was questioning Nye Tian's qualifications because he did not want to hand over the Ink Jade Dragon Sword. But Jiang Lai's status was special. He was the alliance master of the Xingtian alliance. Everyone had to consider his words carefully. Although everyone felt disdain for Jiang Lai's actions, they did not dare to show it or say it. Gongsun Xing's expression turned ugly after hearing Jiang Lai's words. He had never imagined that the alliance master, a peak expert of the 9 major domains, would be so shameless. After thinking for a moment, Gongsun Xing said, Alliance Master Jiang, do you think that just because Nye Tian used the power of his primordial spirit, he cannot obtain the position of Sword Chief? Yes. Jiang Lai nodded and replied loudly. His attitude instantly became unyielding. This president feels that Alliance Master Zhang's words are very reasonable. How can a martial artist who uses other powers to defeat his opponent be worthy of the position of Sword Chief? Another voice sounded at this time. It was none other than the Holy Assembly's vice president, Nangong Duxiu. Everyone was stunned. They did not expect Nangong Duxiu to stand up for Jiang Lai at this time. Jiang Lai and Nangong Duxiu, the two people with the highest status here, stood up at the same time to question Nie Tian. This made the atmosphere even more strange. Everyone knew that these two were deliberately making things difficult, but no one dared to stand up and say anything. You! Gong Sun Xing was stunned. His gaze swept across Jiang Lai and Nangong Duxiu. He had a gloomy expression and was speechless. Ha ha ha, impressive! At this moment, Nie Tian suddenly burst into laughter and said in a loud voice, "One is the sect master of the Xingtian Alliance, and the other is the vice president of the Holy Parliament. I can't believe that two people with such high statuses can be so shameless." Shameless? Nie Tian was not polite at all. He openly insulted Jiang Lai and Duxiu in public. Since the two of them had already gone this far, Nie Tian naturally couldn't endure it any longer. "Stinking brat, pay attention to who you're talking to." Jiang Lai's face sank after being called shameless by Nie Tian in front of everyone. He spoke in a cold tone. However, he still maintained his dignity and did not attack directly. "Brat, do you know that the word shameless you just said is enough for you to die 100 times? Nangong Duxiu became even more furious and directly threatened Nie Tian. Nie Tian wasn't afraid in the slightest in the face of the two experts' threats. He smiled coldly and said, "Sirs, you dare to do shameless things, but don't dare to bear the reputation of being shameless?" Jiang Lai frowned and said in a cold voice, "Kid from the Nie clan, don't think that I won't dare to kill you. If you think I'm shameless, then just say it." "All right." Nie Tian faintly smiled and his gaze swept across everyone. He said, "As Alliance Master Zhang said, the Evil Peak Sword Seminar is indeed a grand meeting of the sword path. However, all the participating swordsmen are using their martial power. I believe that everyone can clearly see that many of the participants are even using their bloodline power. The strength of the sword path is originally supported by the cultivation of the martial path. Does using my Yuan spirit mean that I'm not a swordsman? If that's the case, then I suggest that all the swordsmen cripple their own martial power and be a pure swordsman with peace of mind. Only then will you be qualified to take the title of Sword Chief." As soon as Nie Tian's words fell, the crowd became restless. Nie Tian is right. The Evil Peak Sword Seminar is a grand meeting of the sword path, but it has never prohibited swordsmen from using other powers. That's right. The Evil Peak Sword Seminar has always been a grand meeting of the sword path. Why can't a swordsman become a sword chief if he uses his Yuan spirit? There must be someone with ulterior motives who doesn't want Nie Tian to become the sword chief. Finally, someone couldn't help but start whispering to each other. Jiang Lai's expression instantly turned gloomy when he heard the crowd's discussion. He glared at Nie Tian and said in a cold voice, "Brat, you are twisting words and forcing logic." "Yes," Nangong Duxiu echoed. "Little bastard, no matter how glib your tongue is, don't even think about becoming the sword chief today." Nie Tian looked at the two's auras and saw that they were about to fight. He couldn't help but smile cold and say, "From the looks of it, are you two desperate? You're courting death." Jiang Lai's eyes turned cold. He could no longer suppress the anger in his heart. With a roar, his aura surged and turned into a massive pressure that pressed down on Nie Tian. Nie Tian's eyes trembled. He didn't expect Jiang Lai to be so shameless to attack him in front of so many people. He had used up a lot of his energy and couldn't withstand Jiang Lai's pressure. The vast pressure covered the sky and the earth. The terrifying aura crushed everything. Stop! At that critical moment, a voice rang out. Shortly after, a terrifying sword aura appeared and blocked the terrifying pressure in the air. Gongsun Xingji appeared next to Nie Tian and stared at Jiang Lai coldly. He said in a deep voice, "Alliance Master Jiang, you are going too far." "So what if I am?" Jiang Lai was startled and said with a gloomy face, "Gongsun Xingji, are you going to make an enemy out of me? A threat, a naked threat." Gongsun Xingji's expression changed. He didn't expect Jiang Lai to be this arrogant. His eyes darkened as he said, "Alliance Master Jiang, whether or not Nie Tian is qualified to be the sword chief is my divine martial sword pagoda's business. It has nothing to do with you. I hereby announce that Nie Tian is the sword chief of this year's Evil Peak Sword Competition." Jiang Lai's eyes trembled as he released a murderous aura. He growled in a deep voice, "Gongsun Xingji, I will ask you again. Are you going to make an enemy out of me?" Everyone felt Jiang Lai's murderous aura. They couldn't help but tremble and their eyes became heated. It seemed like Jiang Lai was really going to turn against him. Jiang Lai and Gongsun Xingji were the top cultivators in the 9 territories and the #1 swordsman in the 9 territories. If these two were to fight, it would be a great show. Gongsun Xingji was also furious. He shouted, "Jiang Lai, I, Gongsun Xingji, want to make an enemy out of you. What can you do?" His domineering voice resounded in the sky, displaying Gongsun Xingji's anger. Since Jiang Lai was being so aggressive, Gongsun Xingji had to fight with his life on the line. "Good, very good." Jiang Lai was stunned at first. Then, he smirked and said coldly, "It seems like I will have to kill today." Chapter 2017. The reason Jiang Lai had come to the Evil Peak sword meet was because of Nie Tian. Originally, he had planned to kill Nie Tian with Song Lan and the others' strength. However, he had never expected Nie Tian's strength to be so strong that it had far exceeded his expectations. Nie Tian's battle prowess in the top 8 battles had made Jiang Lai even more determined to kill him. Now that he thought about it, Nie Tian was only an early overgod, and yet he was stronger than a late paramount god like Song Lan. After all, Celestial Wave wasn't an ordinary late paramount god. He was a very strong one, and was even strong enough to fight peak paramount gods. Nie Tian was only an early overgod, but had managed to defeat a late paramount god. That was a talent that couldn't even be described as heaven-defying. He was a monster that shouldn't even exist. Jiang Lai had a feeling that if he were given a few more years to become a paramount god, he would definitely be able to fight peak paramount gods with ease. There was no way he was going to let Nie Tian grow any stronger. At this moment, he was determined to kill Nie Tian in front of everyone, even if he had to be shameless to the very end. He had a premonition that if he didn't kill Nie Tian today, Nie Tian would become his worst nightmare in the future. Now that he was determined to kill him, Jiang Lai wasn't going to wait any longer. Even if it meant offending the Wind and Cloud Alliance, or even provoking them to retaliate, he wouldn't hesitate. Never could he have imagined that Gongsun Xingji would turn on him for the sake of Nie Tian. He was very curious to know what Nie Tian had that Gongsun Xingji would do such a thing. "Jiang Lai, if you want to kill Nie Tian, you'll have to do it over my dead body." Gongsun Xingji was enraged as well. His huge body released a majestic sword will, making him look like a huge sword that stood between the heavens and the earth. Not to mention the fact that Nie Tian could save his life, Jiang Lai's actions alone were already intolerable to Gongsun Xing. Whether or not Nie Tian was qualified to be the sword chief was a matter of the Shunwu sword pagoda. Yet, Jiang Lai jumped out and said what to do, which was a slap in Gongsun Xingji's face. Gongsun Xing had always been wary of the forbidden blood seal in his body, which was why he had tolerated it time and time again. However, now that Jiang Lai had forced him to this step, he could no longer tolerate it. "If you want to fight, then let's fight. At worst, I'll just die." Gongsun Xingji, you think too highly of yourself. Do you really think you can fight me just because you've reached the legendary realm of sword and martial arts as one? Cold chuckled Jiang Lai. Soon after, with a jerk of his body, rays of golden light immediately radiated from his body, instantly condensing into an armored giant that wrapped around his body. The Xingtian armor. Seeing this, Nie Tian frowned and cried out in his heart. He had seen this on Jiang Yulong before. It was the Xingtian armor of the Jiang family's Xingtian bloodline. However, Jiang Lai's Xingtian armor was many times more powerful than Jiang Yulong's. The golden armored giant was tens of thousands of meters tall, towering like a mountain in the sky, as if it was announcing to the world that he was the ruler of this world. Gongsun Xing's eyes narrowed, and he could not help but feel embarrassed. He could feel the enormous aura of the Xingtian armor. It was definitely not something he could compete with right now. Gongsun Xing, I will defeat you in one move. At this moment, Jiang Lai's voice was heard. The Xingtian armor smashed down. The giant golden fist was like a ball of golden fire, causing the air to tremble. Gongsun Xing's expression changed slightly. He immediately attacked with his sword, and a sword shadow whizzed out. Boom! The moment the golden fist and the sword shadow collided, the sword shadow was unable to withstand a single blow. After a loud bang, it shattered. Ah! In the next moment, a blood-curdling scream could be heard. Gongsun Xing was sent flying, and the air behind him was instantly dyed red with blood. Exalted God Sword Lord! Nie Tian couldn't help but cry out in alarm at this sudden turn of events. He had never imagined that Gongsun Xing could not even take a single punch from Jiang Lai. Although Gongsun Xing had the forbidden blood seal in him, his battle prowess far exceeded that of an ordinary peak paramount god. At the very least, he was stronger than Ghost Martial Wild Sand. Even so, he could not take a single punch from Jiang Lai. From this, one could see how strong Jiang Lai was. This! Everyone gasped in astonishment. Gongsun Xing was known as the #1 swordsman in the 9 realms, and yet he could not take a single punch from Jiang Lai. Gongsun Xing was currently floating in midair. Although he had not died on the spot, his injuries were severe, and he had completely lost the ability to fight. Jiang Lai laughed coldly, his face full of disdain. With such strength, do you think you deserve to be called the #1 swordsman in the 9 realms? Then, Jiang Lai turned to look at Nie Tian and said in a cold voice, Kid from the Nie clan, it's your turn. Nie Tian's expression darkened, and his expression became extremely ugly. If Gongsun Xing had been defeated by a single punch from Jiang Lai, how could he possibly be a match for him? Is League Lord Jiang really going to kill Nie Tian? The eyes of the crowd trembled, as if they couldn't believe what they were seeing. Jiang Lai's status was very high, after all. Would he really attack Nie Tian in front of so many people? At this moment, Jiang Lai couldn't care less. He had already made up his mind to kill Nie Tian. Jiang Lai, if you want to kill Nie Tian, you'll have to kill me first. However, just at this moment, another voice rang out before a figure appeared. It was Guiwu Kwangsha, Ghost Martial Wild Sand. When Jiang Lai saw the face of the person in front of him, he couldn't help but narrow his eyes. Then, he smiled and said, Looks like the kid from the Nie clan isn't simple. There are actually so many experts willing to die for him. Lord Ghost Martial Wild Sand. Seeing Ghost Martial Wild Sand's appearance, Nie Tian couldn't help but cry out in his heart. Ghost Martial Wild Sand's strength was below Gongsun Xing's, and it was simply impossible for him to be a match for Jiang Lai. Jiang Lai, no matter what, you're the leader of an alliance. I didn't expect you to be so despicable. How despicable? Ghost Martial Wild Sand sneered, and said with a provocative face. You're courting death. Jiang Lai's eyes darkened, and his killing intent was revealed. Then, without any hesitation, the Heaven's Punishment armor smashed down once again, aiming for Ghost Martial Wild Sand's life. Ghost Martial Wild Sand only knew how terrifying Jiang Lai was when he felt the aura of this punch. Once this punch landed, Ghost Martial Wild Sand's fate would be certain to be death. Ghost Martial Wild Sand wanted to put up a final resistance, but just as he was about to make his move, something strange happened. Rumble! In the air, a majestic sword image suddenly pierced through the air, directly smashing against the golden fist image. A rumbling sound erupted in the air, and the golden fist image unexpectedly collapsed together with the sword image, transforming into boundless wild energy that dissipated in the air. This sudden scene caused everyone to gawk, as they raised their heads to look over, only to see a black-clothed figure appearing high up in the sky. This black-clothed figure was extremely strong, and was actually able to block Jiang Lai's punch with a single sword. He was far stronger than Gong Sun Xing. When Ghost Martial Wild Sand saw the face high up in the sky, his gaze couldn't help but tremble as he cried out a name in his heart, Wind Flame Thousand Feathers. At this moment, the person that appeared was none other than the Wind Flame Thousand Feathers. Ghost Martial Wild Sand had never imagined that the Wind Flame Thousand Feathers would actually appear at this moment. What's more, he didn't expect that the strength of the Wind Flame Thousand Feathers would actually reach such a level. Chapter 2018. Gui Wu Kuang Sha had already prepared for the worst, but he didn't expect Wind Flame Thousand Feathers to appear at the crucial moment and block that nearly fatal strike for him. The reason why Wind Flame Thousand Feathers could block Jiang Lai's punch so easily was because he had already reached the legendary realm of sword and martial arts as one. Gui Wu Kuang Sha was very surprised that Wind Flame Thousand Feathers had actually broken through to the legendary realm. And looking at Wind Flame Thousand Feathers' aura, he should have just broken through to the legendary realm not long ago. At this moment, Gui Wu Kuang Sha vaguely understood why Wind Flame Thousand Feathers would choose this time to attack the divine martial sword pagoda. It turned out that he had broken through to the legendary realm. He already knew that Wind Flame Thousand Feathers' talent in Sword Dao was extremely high and that breaking through to the legendary realm was just a matter of time. He just didn't expect it to be this early. Speaking of which, he was a teacher, but he was only at the advanced realm of sword and martial arts as one. He was really ashamed. The sudden appearance of Wind Flame Thousand Feathers stunned everyone. Their expressions became very strange. Who is this person? How can he be so powerful? Yeah, even the Divine Sword Master couldn't take a punch from Lord Jiang Lai, but he could easily take it. This is too scary. This person's strength is definitely at the pinnacle. Could he be the Wind and Cloud Alliance Master or the Sacred President? People guessed Wind Flame Thousand Feathers' identity because they could see that the latter's strength was obviously at the same level as Jiang Lai. Unfortunately, they guessed wrong. Wind Flame Thousand Feathers was neither the Wind and Cloud Alliance Master nor the Sacred President. It was Thousand Feathers Tower Master. Who are you? Jiang Lai was stunned for a moment. He immediately looked at Wind Flame Thousand Feathers and asked coldly. Wind Flame Thousand Feathers' reaction was extremely cold. He said solemnly, "You people who claim to be righteous forces are actually all shameless people." That swordsman called Nie Tian had clearly defeated all his opponents. Just because he used his spirit, you, the Xingtian Alliance Master, said that he doesn't have the qualifications to be the Sword Chief and even wanted to kill him. I would like to ask Alliance Master Jiang, is a mere inky jade dragon sword more important than the prestige of your Xingtian Alliance? Wind Flame Thousand Feathers' words were forceful and contained a strong sense of mockery. Jiang Lai's expression instantly turned ugly. I don't need you to meddle in how I do things. Jiang Lai's expression changed. He looked at the Wind Flame Thousand Feathers with a gloomy gaze and said in a cold voice, You, on the other hand, have always been hiding nearby. Furthermore, you don't dare to reveal your true identity. From what I can see, you are the one with ulterior motives. Feng Hu Qianyu faintly smiled and took a step forward. His figure appeared not far from Jiang Lai and said in a loud voice, "Since Alliance Master Jiang wants me to reveal my identity, how can I refuse? I am Master Thousand Feather, Wind Flame Thousand Feather. Master Qianyu." When everyone heard the Wind Flame Qianyu's words, their eyes couldn't help but tremble, and their faces obviously revealed expressions of fear. In the 9 territories, besides the Holy Parliament, Wind and Cloud Alliance, and Xingtian Alliance, there were also 3 major dark organizations, namely the Dragnet and Earthnet, Reverse Scale, and Thousand Feathers Tower. The reason why Qianyu Tower and other forces are called dark organizations is mainly because they are too mysterious, and very few people have a deep understanding of them. Qianyu Building was already a very mysterious organization, and its building master was even more unfathomable. Who would have thought that the powerful figure in front of them was the legendary Tower Master Qianyu? Master Qianyu. Jiang Lai was startled at first, but then he laughed and said coldly, "I didn't expect you to appear here. It seems that I guessed correctly. You came here with an ulterior motive." Although Jiang Lai didn't know the Wind Flame Thousand Feather, he knew another person, and that was the Wind Flame Master. He had also heard a little about the Wind Flame Master in the past. He guessed that the Wind Flame Thousand Feather and the Wind Flame Master must have a very close relationship. The Wind Flame Thousand Feather was most likely here because of the Wind Flame Master's death. "Wind Flame Thousand Feather, it's you." On the other side, Gongsun Sheng was also startled, and he looked very surprised. The Wind Flame Thousand Feather used to be a member of the Divine Martial Sword Pagoda, and he had met Gongsun Sheng several times. However, when Gongsun Sheng saw the Wind Flame Thousand Feather again, the latter's aura had completely changed, and he was no longer the young swordsman from back then. He had just fought with the Wind Flame Thousand Feather, and had just come out. The latter might be here because of the Wind Flame Master's death. No wonder the Wind Flame Thousand Feather said that he was a debt collector when he first appeared. Debt collector? What debt? Of course, it was for his father's death back then. Gongsun Sheng's expression darkened when he thought of this. He could tell that the Wind Flame Thousand Feather's current strength was not the same as before. If the Wind Flame Thousand Feather believed that the Divine Martial Sword Pagoda was responsible for the Wind Flame Master's death, then he would definitely take revenge. With the Wind Flame Thousand Feather's current strength, he could destroy the entire Divine Martial Sword Pagoda by himself. If Gongsun Sheng didn't have the Forbidden Blood Seal in his body, he might be able to fight with the Wind Flame Master. However, he was no match for the Wind Flame Master now. As for Xian Zongfeng, he was definitely no match for the Wind Flame Master. Today seemed to be the Divine Martial Sword Pagoda's doomsday. Jiang Lai alone was already very troublesome, and now there was the Wind Flame Master. How could the Divine Martial Sword Pagoda deal with him? At this moment, the Wind Flame Master looked at Gongsun Sheng and asked in a cold tone, "Sir Divine Sword Master, you should know why I'm here, right?" Gongsun Sheng's expression darkened with a pained expression. He nodded and said, "Wind Flame Master, if you want to take revenge on the Divine Martial Sword Pagoda because of your father's death, then I have no complaints. I'm willing to shoulder all the blame, but please don't drag the other people of the Divine Martial Sword Pagoda into this." "Sir Divine Sword Master, you..." Guiwu Kwangsha's expression changed after hearing Gongsun Sheng's words, but he didn't know what to say. Gongsun Sheng didn't explain anything because he knew that since the Wind Flame Master was here, it would be useless even if he tried to explain. He might as well shoulder all the blame and at least protect the Divine Martial Sword Pagoda's dignity. In fact, there were many suspicious points about the Wind Flame Master's death. It was supposed to be a very simple mission. With the Wind Flame Master's strength, it was impossible for anything to happen to him. The strange thing was that the Wind and Fire Masters actually died on that simple mission. Gongsun Sheng had secretly investigated back then, but he couldn't find anything. In the end, he could only let it go. "Sir Divine Sword Master, I respect you as a great swordsman. I don't want to drag the others into my father's death, but other than you, there is one more person who must die. Wind Flame Master nodded and then turned around to look at Xian Zongfeng in the sky. He growled, Xian Zongfeng, at this moment, don't you want to stand up and say something? Xian Zongfeng's face instantly turned pale. Chapter 2019. Everyone was stunned when Fenghua Qinyu called out Xian Zongfeng's name. Even Gongsun Xingji's expression changed. He thought to himself, Xian Zongfeng? Is he related to Fenghua Cheng's death? Jiang Lai was watching from the side. He was not in a hurry as he wanted to watch the show in front of him. Xian Zongfeng calmed down and stepped out. He pretended to be confused and looked at Fenghua Qinyu. He said, Fenghua Qinyu, what do you want me to say? Say what? Fenghua Qinyu asked back and said coldly, Say how you killed my father back then. A cold voice resounded in the air like a clap of thunder. Fenghua Qinyu did not hide at all. He pointed out that Xian Zongfeng was the murderer of Fenghua Cheng. Gongsun Xingji and Guiwu Guangsha were stunned when they heard Fenghua Qinyu's words. The shock in their hearts was written on their faces. Both of them had investigated Fenghua Cheng's death before. Who would have thought that the person who killed Fenghua Cheng was right beside them? Moreover, he was the divine martial sword pagoda's sword master Wu. Their first reaction was shock and doubt. But looking at Fenghua Qinyu's expression, he was obviously not lying. Moreover, Fenghua Qinyu had investigated for a long time. If there was no concrete evidence, he would definitely not say it publicly. As soon as Fenghua Qinyu said this, the crowd was in an uproar. Sword Master Wu. He killed Master Qinyu's father? What's going on? Master Qinyu is here to avenge his father's death. There's going to be a good show. Who is Master Qinyu's father? Why did Sword Master Wu kill him? The crowd discussed and shifted their attention to Fenghua Qinyu and Xian Zongfeng. Xian Zongfeng's eyes trembled. He forced himself to stay calm and said, Fenghua Qinyu, I was good friends with your father. Why did I kill him? What do you want this sword master to explain to you for slandering me like that? Are you slandering me? Fenghua Qinyu smiled coldly. He flipped his hand and a soul shadow appeared on his palm. Zhuo Bufan. Nie Tian's eyes couldn't help but narrow when he saw the face of the soul phantom, and he shouted out a name. The soul shadow that gushed out from the palm of the firestorm Thousand Feathers was none other than Zhuo Bufan. Previously, Zhuo Bufan had been abducted by the firestorm Thousand Feathers. Unexpectedly, he was only left with a remnant soul. Zhuo Bufan. Gongsun Xing and Xian Zongfeng exclaimed at the same time when they saw Zhuo Bufan's soul shadow. Without a doubt, Zhuo Bufan had already been killed by the Wind Flame Thousand Feathers, and only an incomplete soul remained. Wind Flame Thousand Feathers, you're so ruthless. Not only did you destroy his martial body, but you also imprisoned his soul. You really have the heart of a jackal. Xian Zongfeng calmed down and shouted angrily. He shouted like this naturally in order to arouse public indignation, to let everyone witness the Wind Fire Thousand Plumes' viciousness. Needless to say, the Wind Flame Thousand Feathers was indeed extremely poisonous. Not only did it kill Zhuo Bufan, it even imprisoned his soul. So much nonsense. The Wind Flame Thousand Feathers completely ignored Xian Zongfeng. He smiled coldly and said, Xian Zongfeng, did you plant that thing in Zhuo Bufan's body? What thing? Xian Zongfeng asked and pretended to be innocent. Fenghua Qianyu sneered and glanced at Zhuo Bufan. The latter said, Lord Swordmaster Wu, you planted a powerful sword seal rune in my body to increase my strength. Have you forgotten? Zhuo Bufan's words made Gongsun Xing stunned. The way he looked at Xian Zongfeng also changed. He suddenly remembered that Zhuo Bufan's strength had indeed increased a lot in a short period of time. Could it be that all of this was done by Xian Zongfeng? Nonsense. Xian Zongfeng refused to admit it. He scolded in a deep voice, Zhuobuffan, when did I plant the sword seal rune in your body? Sword Master Wu Yu. Although Zhuobuffan was only left with a broken soul, his mind was still clear. He looked at Xian Zongfeng in surprise. It was the latter who planted the blood-crying sword infant in his body. Why did he not admit it now? Xian Zongfeng, you are the Sword Master Wu of the Divine Martial Sword Pagoda. I didn't expect you to be such a villain. You dare to do it but don't dare to admit it. The disdain and killing intent in Wind Flame Thousand Feathers' eyes intensified. At this time, Xian Zongfeng had made up his mind. He would not admit it no matter what. He shouted, Feng Hua Qianyu, you captured Zhuobuffan, killed him, and imprisoned his soul. Of course, he will say whatever you want him to say. Since you've already determined that this sword master killed your father, then please make your move. At most, this sword master will just die. Xian Zongfeng was very cunning. He knew that he was no match for the Wind Flame Thousand Feathers, so he insisted that the latter was framing him. The eyes of the crowd were flickering. It was obvious that they were questioning Wind Flame Thousand Feathers. Wind Flame Thousand Feathers could ignore the doubts of the others and attack Xian Zongfeng directly. However, he didn't want to do that. Xian Zongfeng, you still don't admit it? As Wind Flame Thousand Feathers spoke, he suddenly flipped his palm. A bloody whirlpool appeared in his palm. The whirlpool quickly changed into the shape of a baby. However, it was red like blood and looked very bloody. This is... Nie Tian saw this scene and his eyes narrowed. He exclaimed in his heart. Blood-crying sword infant's body. At the same time, Fat Cat's voice rang in his mind. The thing that Wind Flame Thousand Feathers took out was the body of the blood-crying sword infant. Xian Zongfeng, this is the sword seal rune that you left in Zhuobuffan's body. Wind Flame Thousand Feathers stretched out his palm so that everyone could see the face of the blood-crying sword infant. He said loudly, I have already sensed it. This sword seal rune can increase the sword intent of the swordsman and even increase the talent of the swordsman. But at the same time, the sword seal rune will also absorb the sword intent of the swordsman and gradually change its shape into the shape of a baby. If I am not wrong, once the baby formed by the rune grows up, it will break through the swordsman's martial body and the swordsman will die here. This sword seal rune is clearly stealing the sword intent of the swordsman. Back then, my father also had the aura of this rune in his body. As he spoke, Wind Flame Thousand Feathers looked at Xian Zongfeng and said cold, Xian Zongfeng, the rune in Zhuobuffan's body was planted by you. You are not helping him but harming him. He was not killed by me. He was unable to bear the sword seal rune in his body, so his body exploded and he died. Back then, my father also died because of the same reason. I think the sword seal rune in my father's body was also planted by you. Wind Flame Thousand Feathers didn't know what the blood-crying sword infant was, so he could only call it the sword seal rune. Nonsense. Just as Wind Flame Thousand Feathers finished speaking, Xian Zongfeng sneered and said, Wind Flame Thousand Feathers, all of this is your guess. How did your father die? How did you know? How did you know that your father had the aura of the rune in his body? Wind Flame Thousand Feathers' eyes suddenly flickered. He stared fixedly at Xian Zongfeng and said, Because I also have the same sword seal rune on my body. As soon as he finished speaking, Wind Flame Thousand Feathers' body shook. A scarlet halo surged out from his body and enveloped his entire body, releasing an extremely bloody aura. When Nie Tian saw the scarlet halo outside of Wind Flame Thousand Feathers' body, his eyes trembled and he couldn't help but cry out, Blood-crying sword infant. Chapter 2020. Sobbing blood nascent sword. There was also a sobbing blood nascent sword in Thousand Feathers Wind's body. Nie Tian suddenly reacted, his face full of shock and confusion. He never would have thought that Thousand Feathers Wind's body would also have a sobbing blood nascent sword. How is this possible? Not only was Nie Tian surprised, but Xian Zongfeng was even more surprised. The latter's eyes trembled as he exclaimed. Thousand Feathers Wind released the sobbing blood-nascent sword's aura, which shocked Nie Tian and Xian Zongfeng. However, when Nie Tian became cold and carefully sensed Thousand Feathers Wind's aura, he found that the latter's sobbing blood-nascent sword's aura was very unique. It seemed to be different from the ordinary sobbing blood-nascent sword, mixed with an extremely strong bloodline aura. What's going on? Nie Tian's face was even more confused. He clearly did not feel any sobbing blood-nascent sword's aura from Thousand Feathers Wind's body, so why did the latter suddenly release it? I understand. Right at this moment, the little fat cat suddenly let out a strange cry, its voice filled with excitement as it cried out, "Mutated, mutated, the blood-sobbing infant sword has mutated." Mutated? Nie Tian was stunned. The sobbing blood-nascent sword can mutate? He had heard of mutated spirit beasts with mutated bloodlines, but he did not know that the sobbing blood-nascent sword could also mutate. Yes. Fat Cat calmed down, nodded heavily, and said, "The sobbing blood-nascent sword in Thousand Feathers Wind's body was not planted, it was obtained from the bloodline." What do you mean? Nie Tian was stunned, his face full of confusion. Very simple. Fat Cat laughed and said, Thousand Feathers Wind's body was not planted with the sobbing blood-nascent sword, it was inherited from the bloodline. His father, Wind Master Wind's body had the sobbing blood-nascent sword, and he merged it with the bloodline in his body, unexpectedly creating a bloodline power. Therefore, Thousand Feathers Wind's body also has the sobbing blood-nascent sword. Moreover, his sobbing blood-nascent sword is a bloodline power, it does not harm to him, it is a pure bloodline talent. This allowed him to possess extraordinary talent in the way of the sword. Well, Nie Tian was shocked and didn't know what to say. He had never thought that the Thousand Feathers of Wind Flame's weeping blood-nascent sword was actually the power of bloodline. No wonder he couldn't sense it just now. Back then, when Xian Zongfeng planted the blood-sobbing nascent sword in Wind and Fire Union, it unexpectedly created a kind of bloodline power. Through this bloodline, he passed the blood-sobbing nascent sword to Wind and Fire Thousand Feathers. Not surprisingly, Feng Hua and Bing Hong also had the blood-weeping nascent sword within their bodies. However, the difference was that the blood-tier nascent sword of the father and son duo was innately born. It didn't do them any harm, and only increased their talent in the way of the sword. No wonder Fenhua Qianyu was able to reach the legendary realm of sword and martial unity. Fenhua Bing Hong was so young, but his sword Dao strength was so monstrous. So it was because of the blood-weeping sword infant. It was precisely because Qianyu had the blood-tier nascent sword in his body that he firmly believed that his father was killed by someone. Xian Zongfeng, what else do you have to say? Qianyu said coldly, looking at Xian Zongfeng with an extremely strong murderous intent. Xian Zongfeng was stunned. He was also stunned by the scene in front of him. For a moment, he couldn't react, but he immediately calmed down and said, Qianyu, what can you prove with your words alone? How can you prove that I am the one who did these things? Qianyu's eyes darkened. He didn't expect that at this point, Xian Zongfeng still wouldn't admit it. He is not alone. However, right at that moment a voice sounded out. Soon after, a figure appeared and arrived beside Gui Wu Kuangsha. It was Nie Tian. Nie Tian. Xian Zongfeng's pupils shrank. He didn't expect Nie Tian to stand up at this time. Nie Tian? Why did he stand up? The crowd was also stunned, looking at Nie Tian with a puzzled face. Could it be that Nie Tian had something to do with this matter? Xian Zongfeng, seeing me stand up, are you panicking? Nie Tian smiled faintly, looking at Xian Zongfeng with a playful face. Panicking? Why should I panic? Xian Zongfeng pretended to be calm and asked sternly. Since that's the case, then I will tell you everything I know. Nie Tian smiled and said loudly, the sword seal rune in Zhuo Bufan's body is called the blood-tier nascent sword. It is an evil technique to cultivate sword intent. This evil technique first plants the blood-tier nascent sword seed in the warrior's body, then the blood-tier nascent sword will continuously absorb the sword intent in the swordsman's body, and thus become stronger and stronger. When the blood-tier nascent sword matures, the person who planted the blood-tier nascent sword will take it out of the swordsman's body, and then take the sword intent in the blood-tier nascent sword for himself. What an evil technique! Hearing Nie Tian's words, the crowd's expression changed and became frightened. Xian Zongfeng looked at Nie Tian with a stunned face, his expression clearly saying, "How do you know this?" Nie Tian smiled faintly and continued, "The blood-tier nascent sword in Zhuo Bufan's body was indeed planted by Xian Zongfeng. Not only that, Xian Zongfeng also planted the blood-tier nascent sword in Lian Wui's body. However, due to a freak combination of factors, the blood-tier nascent sword in Lian Wui's body was transferred to another swordsman." "Nie Tian, you are speaking nonsense." Xian Zongfeng could no longer remain calm and roared madly. "Humph!" Nie Tianling laughed, completely ignoring Xian Zongfeng, and continued, "The reason why I know this is because I also have the blood-tier nascent sword in my body, and it was Xian Zongfeng who ordered someone to give it to me. However, my martial body is different from ordinary martial artists, and I swallowed the blood-tier nascent sword." "Nonsense, you are talking nonsense, you are framing me." Xian Zongfeng's face was pale, and he shouted like a madman. "Framing me?" The corners of Nie Tian's mouth curled up as he asked, "Lord Sword Master Wu, may I ask why I would want to frame you? What good would it do me?" At this time, the crowd's gaze changed, and they all focused on Xian Zongfeng, looking at him as if they were looking at a monster. "Xian Zongfeng, it was really you." At this time, Gongsun Xing opened his mouth and looked at Xian Zongfeng with a face full of shock. How could he have thought that such a vicious person was hiding by his side? Gongsun Xing originally had doubts about Feng Huqianyu's words, but Nie Tian's appearance made him unable to doubt it anymore. Although he had not known Nie Tian for a long time, but he could see that the latter was definitely not the kind of person who would speak without thinking. Xian Zongfeng's face changed at this time, and he was extremely shocked. He knew that at this time, even if he did not admit it, it would be useless. Everyone believed Feng Huqianyu and Nie Tian's words. So what if it was me? Suddenly, Xian Zongfeng roared, and a strange smile appeared on his face. His whole person seemed to have gone crazy, and he laughed crazily. "I am a swordsman, and I am pursuing a higher realm of the sword, is this wrong? If you have the blood-tier nascent sword in your hands, you will definitely do the same thing. Finally you admit it." Nie Tianling smiled coldly and said indifferently, "Pursuing a higher realm of the sword is not wrong, but you should not use such evil means." Chapter 2021. Feng Huqianyu took a step in the air, and the aura of his entire body instantly rose to the limit. His entire body was surging with a vast and powerful and frightening sword intent. His entire body was like an ocean where sword intent converged, giving off an extremely intense pressure. Such a powerful sword aura! Nie Tian was shocked by Feng Thousand Feathers' powerful aura. This was the most terrifying sword aura he had ever seen. Even Gongsun Xingji at his peak would not be able to release such a violent sword aura. After today, the title of the number 1 sword wielder in the 9 regions would change. Feng Thousand Feathers' strength had surpassed Gongsun Xingji. He was the real number 1 sword wielder in the 9 regions. This man's sword cultivation is terrifying. It seems that the blood-sobbing sword infant has greatly improved his bloodline. Otherwise, he wouldn't have such terrifying strength. Fat Cat's voice was heard, praising Feng Thousand Feathers' strength. Feng Thousand Feathers was able to block Jiang Lai's punch so easily because of his terrifying strength. Jiang Lai looked at Feng Thousand Feathers and was obviously shocked. "You're so powerful!" Xian Zongfeng's eyes trembled and he could not hide the fear on his face. He obviously did not expect Feng Hua Thousand Feathers' strength to reach such a terrifying level. Xian Zongfeng, it's time for you to pay the price. Feng Hua Thousand Feathers said cold. His sword aura surged in the air. It was as if space was under great pressure and was going to collapse at any time. Feng Hua Thousand Feathers, I admit that you're indeed powerful, but it's impossible for you to kill me. Xian Zongfeng's eyes flickered and his face regained some calmness. He smirked slyly. He knew that he could not fight Feng Hua Thousand Feathers, but he was confident that he could leave safely. Is that so? Feng Hua Thousand Feathers sneered. The murderous intent in his eyes turned solid and shrouded Xian Zongfeng. He was furious, but he remained calm. He knew that Xian Zongfeng must have some extraordinary skills to hide in the Shenwu Sword Pagoda for so long. Hence, he dared not be careless. Humph! At this moment, Xian Zongfeng sneered and flipped his palm. A jade-like elixir appeared in his palm. He swallowed it without hesitation and his sword aura began to skyrocket. Boom! 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 Waves of violent sword force surged out, and the space around the profound Song Feng actually had a very subtle change. It was as if it was filled with a mysterious sword intent, showing a kind of dense mist state. It was very strange. When Ye Tian saw the situation, he couldn't help being stunned and asked curiously, "What is that medicinal pill? Why did the sword momentum of Xian Zongfeng's body start to skyrocket after he consumed it? If I'm not mistaken, that should be a pill condensed from the blood-weeping sword infant," the fat cat exclaimed, clearly very surprised. He was right. What Xian Zongfeng consumed was the nascent sword elixir, which was equivalent to an essence burst elixir. It could greatly enhance his sword intent. With the help of the nascent sword pill, the might of the profound Zongfeng's sword intent skyrocketed. In just a blink of an eye, the sword aura around him was already faintly not weaker than the firestorm Thousand Feathers. Ha ha ha, the effect of the nascent sword elixir is better than I expected. My sword art realm has actually reached the legendary realm of sword and martial arts as one. Xian Zongfeng could feel his strength skyrocketing, and he couldn't help but laugh wildly. His eyes actually surged with cold killing intent. Just now, he only wanted to consume the nascent sword elixir to temporarily block the firestorm Thousand Feathers and then wait for an opportunity to escape. However, the effect of the nascent sword elixir was beyond his expectation. Now, he didn't want to leave, but wanted to kill the firestorm Thousand Feathers directly. Another legendary swordsman. The crowd also felt Xian Zongfeng's aura. Their eyes trembled violently, and they subconsciously stepped back. Who would have thought that there would be two legendary swordsmen at the scene, and these two people were going to fight to the death? The firestorm Thousand Feathers' eyes slightly sank, and then he immediately roared, "Xian Zongfeng, your strength has increased at the right time. If you're killed by my sword, it'll really be too easy for you." Arrogant! Xian Zongfeng growled, and his whole body released a wild killing intent. At the same time, a long sword appeared in his hand, and without any hesitation, he directly slashed out. Boom! Suddenly, the endless sword intent surged, and a huge sword shadow appeared, pouring down from the sky, and fell towards the firestorm Thousand Feathers. Almost at the same time, the firestorm Thousand Feathers figure also moved, and the sword intent around his body bloomed in an instant. A terrifying sword light shot out 10,000 meters away, and a majestic sword shadow appeared, going against the momentum, and slashed towards the sky. Two huge sword shadows, one above and one below, were like two giant dragons that were about to collide. Oh no! Seeing this, Nye Tian's face suddenly changed, and he directly shouted, "Everyone, leave!" The strength of the firestorm Thousand Feathers and Xian Zongfeng was too terrifying, and the two of them actually used their full strength in the first confrontation. Most of the people present had the strength below the Supreme God level, and even the airwaves caused by the collision could not withstand it. The others immediately reacted and immediately retreated. At this moment, the two huge sword shadows collided with a loud bang. Rumble! There was a loud roar in the sky, and the terrifying sword-intent airwaves rolled in the sky, spreading in all directions, like the nine heavens river bursting a dam. Extremely sharp sword-intent surged out like a raging sea wave, wreaking havoc in the space. Many people who did not retreat in time were directly hit by the sword-intent airwaves, and there were even many people who could not withstand the impact of the sword-intent, and their martial bodies directly collapsed, turning into blood light and dissipating. In the space, the surrounding sword field was also impacted. Even with the protection of the sword formation, it could not withstand the attack of the sword-intent. The sword formation collapsed, and the sword field's stone pillars directly turned into stone powder. Even the magnificent mountain tens of thousands of meters away was greatly impacted, and shook violently, as if it was going to collapse in the next moment. Nie Tian reacted quickly, and in time, he retreated tens of thousands of meters away, and was not injured. However, his face was very shocked, and the scene in front of him was beyond his expectations. At this moment, he only knew how big the gap between him and the real experts was. Although he had successfully defeated Song Lan, a monstrous sword art genius in the quarterfinals, the battle between them and the battle in front of him was not on the same level. It was not an exaggeration to say that if Nie Tian was a little closer, he would have been dead by now. The firestorm, Thousand Feathers, and the mysterious Songfeng were indeed legendary swordsmen. The clash of their swords was truly earth-shattering. Many people, because of their weak strength, could not dodge in time, and became cannon fodder under the firestorm Thousand Feathers and Xian Zongfeng's swords. At this time, the sword-intent retreated, and two figures appeared in the sky. It was the firestorm Thousand Feathers and Xian Zongfeng. The battle between the two had just begun. Killing intent. Nie Tian looked at the two people in the sky, and suddenly his heart sank. He felt a terrifying killing intent. Chapter 2022. Nie Tian originally wanted to see how terrifying the battle between the Wind Flame Thousand Feathers and Xian Zongfeng would be. He also wanted to comprehend the legendary sword-intent realm of a swordsman. However, he did not expect that Jiang Lai would appear at this time. "Little brat of the Nie clan, are you ready to die?" Jiang Lai coldly stared at Nie Tian and spoke in a cold tone. He did not care about the battle between the Wind Flame Thousand Feathers and Xian Zongfeng. He only cared about Nie Tian's life. He came here to ensure that Nie Tian must die. However, the appearance of the Wind Flame Thousand Feathers suddenly interrupted him, causing him to be delayed for a while. "Jiang Lai, with your status, are you really going to attack a junior?" At this moment, Guiwu Kwangsha's voice resounded, immediately descending to Nie Tian's side. He had been paying close attention to Nie Tian, not relaxing in the slightest. "Guiwu Kwangsha, don't think that just because you are a member of the Guiwu clan, I won't dare to kill you. Jiang Lai's expression let me tell you, today, no one can stop me from killing Nie Tian. Whoever dares to stop me will only have one ending, death." Nie Tian was too monstrous. Jiang Lai would not allow him to live. "Shameless!" Guiwu Kwangsha roared, the sword intent on his body surged, obviously wanting to fight to the death with Jiang Lai. "Ridiculous!" Facing the furious Guiwu Kwangsha, Jiang Lai smiled cold and said, "You want to stop me? Overestimate yourself." As his disdainful voice faded, Jiang Lai's body shook, and the heaven-punishing armor appeared once again. A golden giant that was tens of thousands of meters tall appeared in the sky, and directly punched down towards Nie Tian and the ghost Marshal Wild Sand. This fist, Jiang Lai did not show any mercy, obviously wanting to kill Nie Tian and Guiwu Kwangsha. Guiwu Ninth Heaven, demonic flow blood. Seeing this, Guiwu Kwangsha's expression changed. Immediately after, blood spurted out from his body. Suddenly, blood chi and sword intent surged together, forming a huge sword formation. Lord Gui Wu. Upon seeing this, Nie Tian's expression couldn't help but change. How could he not see that Gui Wu Guangshao was burning his blood and qi, using his life to resist Jiang Lai's fist? For the sake of saving Nie Tian, Gui Wu Guangshao had gambled everything. Boom! Sword intent crazily gushed out from Gui Wu Guangsha's body, as he activated the 9 heavenly demonic flow array. Endless sword intent runes circulated within the space, transforming into a sword array shield, enveloping him and Nie Tian. Boom! In the next moment, a terrifying fist descended like a mountain, bombarding the 9 heavenly demonic flow sword formation. The formation shook violently, and in the next moment it actually cracked open. Crisp, cracking sounds resounded in the air. Bang! In the blink of an eye, the 9 heavenly demonic flow formation collapsed, as a terrifying power descended. The figures of Gui Wu Guangsha and Nie Tian were sent flying backwards, leaving a bloody trail in the air. Teacher! Nie Tian! Seeing this scene from afar, Gui Wu Chan couldn't help but cry out in fear, his face filled with terror. In the air, Nie Tian felt incomparable pain throughout his body, as though he was about to explode. Using the last strand of his strength, a pair of astral soul wings appeared on his back, allowing him to stabilize himself. Lord Gui Wu. Nie Tian hugged Gui Wu Guangsha. The latter's entire body was a mess of blood and flesh, and his aura was weak, as though he was on the verge of death. Gui Wu Guangsha had ignited his blood and qi to activate the 9 heavenly demonic flow sword formation, which was already a huge burden on him. Coupled with the punch from Jiang Lai, one could well imagine the severity of his injuries. Nie Tian, I'm sorry. My strength isn't enough, no, I can no longer protect you. Gui Wu Guangsha looked at Nie Tian, as he spoke with great difficulty. In his heart, he was actually unable to protect Nie Tian. Lord Gui Wu. Nie Tian roared in a low voice, as energy from the earth vein origin gushed out from his body, crazily gushing into Gui Wu Guangsha's body. This was the last bit of energy from the earth vein origin within Nie Tian's body, and it finally stabilized Gui Wu Guangsha's aura. Teacher! At this moment, Gui Wu Chan's figure appeared. Seeing Gui Wu Guangsha on the verge of death, he felt incomparable grief. Bastard, I'll fight it out with you. All of a sudden, Gui Wu Chan raised his head to look at Jiang Lai, as flames of fury gushed out from his eyes. He actually wanted to fight it out with Jiang Lai, but was stopped by Nie Tian's hand. Gui Wu Guangsha was seriously injured, and Nie Tian was similarly grieved. However, he still maintained his calm. Jiang Lai was too strong. Gui Wu Guangsha had ignited his blood and qi, yet he was still unable to block a single palm from Jiang Lai. If Gui Wu Chan were to rush over, he would definitely be sending himself to his death. Gui Wu Guangsha, being able to receive a punch from this alliance chief without dying is already extremely good. Jiang Lai smiled coldly. Staring at Nie Tian with a pair of cold eyes, he said, Nie Tian, now that Gui Wu Guangsha can't hold on any longer, let's see who else can save you. Gongsun Xingji and Gui Wu Guangsha had both been defeated by a single punch from Jiang Lai. From the looks of it, no one would be able to save Nie Tian. Jiang Lai, you're the dignified alliance chief of the Xingtian Alliance, an expert at the pinnacle of the 9 great domains. Yet, you're actually so pleased with yourself for killing a junior like me. Should I say that you're shameless, or should I say that you're shameless? Raising his head to look at Jiang Lai, there wasn't the slightest bit of fear in his eyes. Instead, there was a playful expression on his face. You're courting death. Jiang Lai's expression instantly turned ugly, as a sinister voice rumbled out from his throat. In the next instant, he sent a palm smashing down. He had already made up his mind to kill. Naturally, he wouldn't change his mind just because of a few words from Nie Tian. It didn't matter if he was shameless or shameless. In any case, Nie Tian had to die today. In the face of Jiang Lai's fatal palm strike, Sword force rose from Nye Tian's entire body as he swung the starlight heaven slash in his hand. A sword shadow whistled through the air as it charged towards Jiang Lai. Even if Nye Tian knew that his strength wasn't even worth mentioning in front of Jiang Lai, even if he knew that he wasn't Jiang Lai's match, even if he knew that this battle was destined to end in failure, he definitely wouldn't give up. He would definitely fight to the end. This was Nye Tian. Even at the very last moment, he wouldn't give up and would resist till the very end. Die, ant! Jiang Lai roared as if he had gone mad. His eyes shone with a blazing light, as though he could already see the scene of Nye Tian being annihilated with a single palm strike. The terrifying palm descended with a loud rumble, and Nye Tian's sword shadow immediately shattered in the air. The power of this palm strike was extremely terrifying. If it landed, Nye Tian would definitely die. Nye Tian. At this moment, a clear voice rang out. Then, a figure appeared and charged straight towards them. Cher. Nye Tian's eyes trembled as he turned around to see the figure. He couldn't help but cry out in surprise. He hadn't expected that Cher would actually appear at this moment. Cher wasn't weak, and she was also wearing the Emperor of the Underworld Saint robe. Unfortunately, her opponent was Jiang Lai. Even if she were to make a move, she would only die together with Nye Tian. Your Royal Highness! Almost at the same time, a panicked voice rang out. It was the person who had been hiding beside Cher, Earth Leader. Earth Leader had never expected that Cher would suddenly make a move in order to save Nye Tian. Earth Leader wanted to make a move, but it was already too late. Nye Tian and Cher's lives were hanging by a thread at the same time. Jiang Lai, stop! At this moment, a thunderous roar suddenly rang out in the sky. Then, a 10,000-meter-long golden ray of light appeared in the sky. It was like a giant sword as it attacked Jiang Lai. Grandfather! Nye Tian's expression changed when he heard the voice in the sky, and he cried out in his heart. Chapter 2023. Nye Dao. In the sky, Jiang Lai suddenly heard a thunderous roar. His expression changed, and he exclaimed in his heart. He had never imagined that Nye Dao would appear at this moment. Jiang Lai's brain worked rapidly. He could already feel a powerful force blasting towards him. If he insisted on killing Nye Tian, he could definitely do it, but the price he would pay was being heavily injured by Nye Dao. If he killed Nye Tian but was heavily injured by Nye Dao would definitely not let him leave this place alive. He really wanted to kill Nye Tian, but Nye Tian's life was clearly not as important as his. He would not give up his life for Nye Tian. Damn it! Jiang Lai reacted instantly. He growled and gave up on killing Nye Tian. He turned around and slapped at the golden light in the sky. Nye Tian's eyes flashed with passion when he saw this. His figure moved, and he retreated several thousand meters away. Boom! At the same time, Nye Dao and Jiang Lai clashed head-on. There was a huge explosion in the sky, and Jiang Lai's figure was forced to take a few steps back. Jiang Lai's strength was originally about the same as Nye Dao's. However, the latter had attacked first, so he had the upper hand. Jiang Lai was on the defensive, so he was slightly weaker. The two experts clashed. Terrifying waves of air surged out, and the crowd was forced to retreat again. The entire Sea of Evil Edge was filled with an extremely frightening power. After a while, the waves of air dissipated, and two figures appeared in the sky. It was Nye Dao and Jiang Lai. That was close. Nye Tian looked at Nye Dao from afar and let out a long breath. It had to be said that Nye Dao had appeared at the right time. If he had come a little later, the consequences would have been unimaginable. This person is the Wind and Cloud Alliance Master. At this time, the crowd finally reacted. They looked at the tyrannical figure with fear. Someone exclaimed, "Wind and Cloud Alliance Master." Most people were shocked, as if they couldn't believe the scene in front of them. The Wind and Cloud Alliance and the Heavenly Punishment Alliance were the strongest forces in the 9 realms. How could the people not be shocked when the leaders of these two alliances appeared at the same time? No one had expected the Wind and Cloud Alliance Master to suddenly appear here and attack Xingtian Alliance Master. They didn't know the relationship between Ye Dao and Ye Tian, so they had no idea what was going on. However, the battle between the two Alliance Masters was something that everyone was looking forward to. They all widened their eyes, waiting for Nye Dao and Jiang Lai to fight again. At this moment, the battle between Wind Flame Thousand Feathers and Xian Zongfeng was still going on. Both of them had already reached the sky and the battle had reached its climax. However, the majority of the crowd's gazes were focused on Nye Dao and Jiang Lai. It was clear that these two were more famous and more attractive. "Cher, are you all right?" Nye Tian became cold. He looked at Cher and asked nervously. "I'm fine." Cher shook her head, but there was a puzzled look on her face. She was also puzzled. Why did she rush over when she saw Nye Tian in danger? Could it be that we really knew each other? Cher looked at Nye Tian and asked doubtfully. Nye Tian confirmed that Cher was fine and didn't say anything else. He then turned his attention to Nye Dao and Jiang Lai. "Jiang Lai, you're shameless." Nye Tian glanced at Nye Tian. Seeing that the latter was fine, he finally calmed down a little. However, his eyes were still filled with anger as he glared at Jiang Lai and roared. Nye Dao naturally knew about the evil edge sword competition. However, he believed in Nye Tian's strength, so he didn't plan on participating in this matter. Moreover, his relationship with Gongsun Xing was very strained. This was also the reason why he didn't come to the Evil Edge Sea. But later on, he heard some things, so he immediately rushed over. Fortunately, he came in time. Otherwise, Nye Tian would be in danger. He never expected that someone of Jiang Lai's status would publicly attack Nye Tian. He knew Jiang Lai very well, but he didn't expect the latter to be shameless to this extent. "Brother Nye, I didn't expect you to come as well. What a surprise." Jiang Lai's expression was very ugly, but he still managed to maintain his composure. He knew that with Nye Dao's appearance, it was impossible for Nye Tian to kill him. To be honest, he was a little wary of Nye Dao. In the past, the Xingtian Alliance and Fengyun Alliance were once allies. Jiang Lai and Nye Dao's relationship was not bad. The two had sparred before, and although there was no clear victor, Jiang Lai faintly felt that his strength was slightly weaker than Nye Dao's. Even the slightest gap between the pinnacle experts would be very obvious in a battle. Jiang Lai estimated that if he and Nye Dao fought to the death, he only had a 40% chance of winning, while Nye Dao had a 60% chance of winning. Because of this, his reaction was very cautious. "Jiang Lai, we have not been friends for a long time. People like you don't deserve to be brothers with me." Nye Dao growled cold. "You should be glad that you didn't kill Nye Tian. Otherwise, you would definitely die here today." Nye Dao was very angry, but fortunately, Nye Tian was fine, so he could still maintain his calm. The reason why he didn't attack Nye Dao was because he was not only Nye Tian's grandfather, but also the leader of the Fengyun Alliance. His identity determined that he couldn't be impulsive. He was very clear how terrifying Jiang Lai's strength was. If he fought with Jiang Lai now, it was very likely that both sides would suffer. The Fengyun Alliance's enemy wasn't just the Xingtian Alliance, but the Holy Parliament. If something happened to Nye Dao, the Holy Parliament would definitely act against the Fengyun Alliance without hesitation. He didn't want to see that happen. Actually, Jiang Lai had the same thoughts. He didn't want to fight to the death with Nye Dao because he was afraid that the Holy Parliament would reap the benefits. Although the Holy Parliament and the Xingtian Alliance had a good relationship, it would be hard to say if Jiang Lai died. The Holy Parliament had always had the ambition to destroy the two alliances and reign supreme over the 9 regions. If Nye Dao and Jiang Lai died together, then the Fengyun Alliance and the Xingtian Alliance would no longer have the right to continue existing. Hua Jiushan was extremely ruthless. He wouldn't go easy on the two alliances. Nie Dao and Jiang Lai both knew this, which was why they could maintain their calm at this moment. Jiang Lai's expression was dark and extremely embarrassed, but he still restrained himself. He pondered for a moment, then said, Nie Dao, there is bound to be a battle between us, but now is not the time. With that, Jiang Lai turned around and prepared to leave. With Nie Dao's appearance, it was no longer possible for him to kill Nie Tian. There was no longer any meaning in staying here. Nie Dao looked on cold, but he obviously wouldn't stop him. His goal was to save people, not to fight to the death with Jiang Lai. Wait! But at this moment, Nie Tian's voice suddenly rang out. His figure moved and appeared beside Nie Dao. Jiang Lai was slightly stunned. He turned around to look at Nie Tian and asked in a cold voice, "Stinking brat, what else do you want?" Chapter 2024. Jiang Lai was just about to leave when he was stopped by Nie Tian, who demanded the Ink Jade Dragon Sword. Before the battle royale, Nie Tian and Jiang Lai had agreed that if Nie Tian became the chief sword of the Evil Edge Sword competition, Jiang Lai would have to hand over the Ink Jade Dragon Sword. This was also the condition that Nie Tian agreed to participate in the battle royale. Now that Nie Tian was the chief sword, according to the agreement, Jiang Lai had to hand over the Ink Jade Dragon Sword. Jiang Lai's expression instantly became ugly. He did not expect that Nie Tian would still dare to raise such a condition at this time. If it was a normal cultivator, they would have been scared speechless, let alone raising conditions. However, Nie Tian was completely different. He acted as if he did not know fear and raised conditions just like before. Moreover, from Nie Tian's point of view, this was a very normal thing because it was fulfilling the agreement. "Brat, do you really want the Ink Jade Dragon Sword?" Jiang Lai's expression was cold and his eyes emitted an undisguised threatening aura as he asked in a deep voice. "Of course." Nie Tian, however, turned a blind eye to the threat and said in a loud voice, "Everyone here can testify that the agreement between us is still valid. Since the Divine Sword Master has announced that I am the chief sword of the Evil Edge Sword competition, then the Ink Jade Dragon Sword is naturally mine." In the end, Nie Tian's eyes flickered and he looked at Jiang Lai with a playful expression. "Alliance leader Jiang, with your status, you won't go back on your word in front of everyone, right?" Jiang Lai's gaze darkened and his face was so dark that it seemed like it was dripping blood. He seemed to be thinking about something. "Nie Tian, what is going on?" At this time, Nie Dao's expression changed slightly and he asked. With a faint smile on his face, Nie Tian explained what had happened earlier. "Jiang Lai, you are more vicious than I imagined. You actually have such thoughts about a junior." After listening, Nie Dao could naturally tell that this was Jiang Lai's method to kill Nie Tian. He could not help but say with a dark expression, "Jiang Lai, your scheme failed. Do you still want to go back on your word?" Only now did Nie Dao realize exactly how ruthless Jiang Lai was in order to kill Nie Tian. He wished for nothing more than to tear Jiang Lai into 1,000 pieces and skin him alive. However, Jiang Lai was truly ruthless. He actually dared to use the Ink Jade Dragon Sword as a wager. At this moment, Jiang Lai's expression was extremely ugly. It was clear that he was hesitating whether or not he should hand over the Ink Jade Dragon Sword. If it was anything else, he would have handed it over without any hesitation. However, the Ink Jade Dragon Sword was too precious. It was a genuine sacred tool. "Alliance Master Jiang, it's just a joke. Why take it so seriously?" At this moment, a voice suddenly rang out. Soon after, a figure appeared behind Jiang Lai. "Nangong Duxiu." Nie Tian was startled. He looked at that figure and shouted her name. Who would have thought that Nangong Duxiu would appear at this time, and even say a joke? It was clear that Nangong Duxiu was standing on Jiang Lai's side. She was trying to exonerate him. However, her words were a bit too shameless. "What a good joke!" Nie Tian's gaze froze and he sneered. "President Nangong's words are truly shocking. Back when Alliance Master Jiang made an agreement with me, you didn't stand up and point out that he was joking. Why are you spouting nonsense now that it's Alliance Master Jiang's turn to hand over the Ink Jade Dragon Sword? Little bastard, who are you calling a dog? Nangong Dushio was startled at first, but he quickly reacted. His old face turned red as he roared angrily. It had never occurred to him that, given his status, Nie Tian would dare to insult him in front of so many people in such an unbridled manner. Calling you a dog is an insult to a dog, Nie Tianling replied coldly. He wasn't afraid of Nangong Dushio at all. In any case, he was already on the Sacred Parliament's death list. So what if he cursed Nangong Dushio? Little bastard, you are courting death. Nangong Dushio was extremely furious. His aura instantly surged and he looked like a porcupine. However, he only dared to look at Nie Tian from afar. He didn't dare to move. Nie Dao was just standing to the side. How could he let Nangong Dushio injure Nie Tian? At this time, Nie Dao also spoke. He spoke in a cold tone. Nangong Dushio, I thought that Jiang Lai was shameless enough. I didn't expect you to be even more shameless. I will tell you that no matter what you say, you must hand over the Ink Jade Dragon Sword today. Otherwise, even if I has to risk my life, I will make you pay the price. After saying that, Nie Dao's body shook. His entire body released thousands of golden radiances. Instantly, the entire space was filled with dazzling radiances. What a powerful aura! Nie Tian was incomparably shocked when he sensed the aura around Nie Dao. He could sense that Nie Dao was releasing the spirit confinement power of the spirit confinement fetus. It was extremely terrifying. It was even stronger than the wind flame, thousand feathers, and mysterious Zongfeng's sword intent aura. From this, it could be seen that even legendary swordsmen like the wind flame, thousand feathers, and mysterious Zongfeng were slightly weaker than an expert like Nie Dao. In the 9 major realms, there were many peak paramount god experts. However, there weren't many who could reach that level of battle prowess. For example, Guiwu Kwangsha, Nangong Dushio, and Nie Dao. They were all peak paramount gods, but there was a huge difference in their battle prowess. This was mainly because there was a huge difference in their martial physique. At the same realm, the stronger the martial physique, the stronger the battle prowess. At the later stages, the difference in martial physiques became even more obvious. Nie Dao was able to stand at the peak because of his spirit confinement fetus. That was his most terrifying aspect. Jiang Lai was able to contend against Nie Dao because of his Xingtian bloodline. Nangong Dushio was weaker than Nie Dao and Jiang Lai, not in terms of realm, but in terms of martial physique and bloodline. All of the paramount gods understood this. Therefore, Jiang Lai, Nangong Dushio, and the others knew that if Nie Tian reached the peak paramount god realm, he would definitely become an invincible existence in the 9 major realms. Nie Dao was only a spirit confinement fetus, but he was already a peak existence in the 9 major realms. Nie Tian had a god-devil nascent embryo, which was a bloodline power that was far more terrifying than the spirit confinement fetus. Once he reached the peak, it would be unimaginable. Nie Tian's current battle prowess was the best proof. This was the reason why Jiang Lai and Nangong Dushio were so anxious to kill Nie Tian. Nie Tian was simply too formidable. They couldn't stand by and watch such a formidable enemy grow stronger and stronger without any restrictions. When Jiang Lai and Nangong Dushio sensed Nie Dao's aura, their expressions changed. Their old faces were as unsightly as could be. Jiang Lai was very familiar with Nie Dao. The latter wasn't someone who would bluff. If Jiang Lai didn't hand over the Inkjade Dragon Sword, Nie Dao might really go all out. Are we really going to hand over the Inkjade Dragon Sword? But the Inkjade Dragon Sword was too important. This made Jiang Lai hesitate. Alliance Master Jiang, you're the Alliance Master at any rate. If you go back on your word to a junior, then wouldn't you become the laughingstock of the world? At this moment, another voice resounded, and it carried a trace of ridicule and disdain. Chapter 2025. Upon hearing Earth Chief's words, Nye Tian's face, which was already the color of an eggplant, turned even greener. He did not care about the other party's mockery, but he did care about the latter's attitude. In such a situation, Earth Chief's interjection was not to mock Jiang Lai, but to express his stance. In truth, Nye Dao and Nye Tian could also see that Jiang Lai was hesitating because of Nangong Duxiu. Nangong Duxiu's battle power was indeed weaker than Nye Dao and Jiang Lai's, but it was not to be underestimated. Under normal circumstances, Nye Dao and Jiang Lai would have a 60% chance of winning in a life-and-death battle, while Jiang Lai had a 40% chance. But with Nangong Duxiu, the odds would be reversed. Nye Dao would only have a 40% chance of winning, while Jiang Lai would have a 60% chance. It was precisely because of this that Jiang Lai hesitated. But now, Earth Chief had suddenly stepped forward to express his stance. He was standing on Nye Tian's side. In this way, Jiang Lai no longer had the slightest advantage. Earth Chief's strength was no weaker than Nangong Duxiu's. Alliance Master Jiang, have you decided? As smart as Nye Tian was, if Jiang Lai could think of something like this, he could also think of it. He couldn't help but smile faintly and put on a calm expression. Jiang Lai's expression changed slightly. He knew that if he did not hand over the Ink Jade Dragon Sword, a fierce battle would be unavoidable. Okay. After a long moment of hesitation, Jiang Lai finally spoke. His eyes flickered with a sinister light as he flipped his palm, took out a black sword, and threw it to Nye Tian. He said in a cold voice, "The Ink Jade Dragon Sword is for you. Alliance Master Jiang is so generous." Nye Tian took the black longsword and didn't forget to mock Jiang Lai. Immediately after, he sent his divine sense into the black longsword. However, strangely enough, his divine sense was repelled by a force. Nye Tian's expression changed, and he was quite surprised. "Nye Tian, this sword is indeed the Inky Jade Dragon Sword. However, there is a spiritual seal within the body of the sword. There seems to be a soul imprisoned within it." At this moment, the fat cat's voice rang out as it spoke to Nye Tian. Nye Tian nodded his head as his lips curled into a smile. He then put away the Ink Jade Dragon Sword. "Goodbye." Jiang Lai didn't care about Nye Tian's reaction. After a sneer, he turned around and left. Now that the Ink Jade Dragon Sword was in his hands, Nye Tian naturally wouldn't care about Jiang Lai anymore. He let the latter leave. Nangong Duxiu's eyes surged with cold intent. She coldly glanced at Nye Tian before leaving. Looking at Jiang Lai and Nangong Duxiu's silhouettes, the corners of Nye Tian's mouth rose. He bitterly smiled and said, "It seems like these people can't hold back anymore. They want to kill me immediately." The commotion caused by the evil-edged sword exchange was greater than Nye Tian had imagined. His growth speed was too terrifying. It had already reached the point where the Xingtian Alliance and the Sacred Parliament couldn't sit idly by. His future path would probably be even more difficult. Fortunately, the Ink Jade Dragon Sword was in his hands. Since the fat cat had confirmed that the black sword was the Ink Jade Dragon Sword, Nye Tian was no longer in a hurry. Fortunately, Nine God Calamity didn't appear. Otherwise, today's matter wouldn't have been so simple. Nye Dao looked at the figures of Jiang Lai and the others and said solemnly. Nye Tian faintly smiled and said, "Right now, Nine God Calamity is probably cultivating in seclusion in the Glazed Demon Pagoda. How could she have the time to appear here?" Nine God Calamity was definitely cultivating in the Glazed Demon Pagoda. Otherwise, she would have personally appeared. If that was the case, things would be troublesome. Everyone was disappointed to see Jiang Lai and Nangong Duxiu leave. They originally hoped that Nye Dao and Jiang Lai would have a great battle, but they didn't expect such an ending. Meanwhile, in the sky above, the battle between Wind Flame Thousand Feathers and Xian Zongfeng was still ongoing. The battle between the two had reached its climax. It looked like a life and death battle was about to happen. These two have such powerful sword intent. Who are they? Nie Dao's expression changed when he sensed the sword intents. One is the Thousand Feathers Pavilion Lord and the other is the Divine Martial Sword Pagoda's Sword Master Wu. Nie Tian said before turning his attention to Wind Flame Thousand Feathers and Xian Zongfeng. At this moment, Wind Flame Thousand Feathers had the absolute advantage and was suppressing Xian Zongfeng. Die! Wind Flame Thousand Feathers roared and slashed with his sword. Suddenly, a mighty sword shadow with a massive sword pressure pressed down on Xian Zongfeng. Xian Zongfeng's eyes slightly trembled. Although the sword intent around him was still sharp, his sword aura was slowly weakening. The nascent sword divine elixir he had just consumed could not last much longer. Xian Zongfeng didn't expect Wind Flame Thousand Feathers to be so powerful. Otherwise, he would have left immediately instead of fighting for so long. But now it was too late for him to leave. Wind Flame Thousand Feathers' aura had completely overshadowed him, suffocating him. Xian Zongfeng struck out with the 3-foot hidden blade in his hand and a sword shadow whizzed out. Rumble! The two huge sword shadows clashed in the sky. Xian Zongfeng was clearly weaker. His body slightly trembled and was forced to retreat a few thousand meters. Damn it! Xian Zongfeng cursed. His body moved and a pair of sword wings appeared on his back. He frantically tried to escape into the sky. He couldn't continue fighting or he would definitely die in the hands of Wind Flame Thousand Feathers. Trying to escape? Seeing this, Wind Flame Thousand Feathers sneered and stabbed with his sword. Suddenly, sword shadows appeared in the sky and connected into a huge sword net shrouding Xian Zongfeng. Xian Zongfeng felt the sword pressure coming from behind and his face changed. He turned around and stabbed with his sword. Using the rebounding force of the sword aura, his speed became even faster. Seeing this, Wind Flame Thousand Feathers' face instantly turned gloomy. The sword intent on his body skyrocketed to the limit. The huge sword aura was like a raging wave, standing tall in the sky. He's going to attack with all his strength. Nie Tian saw this scene from afar and his eyes could not help but tremble. Although he was hundreds of thousands of meters away from Wind Flame Thousand Feathers, he could clearly feel the violent sword aura surrounding the latter. A legendary swordsman was indeed terrifying. Wind Flame Thousand Feathers could no longer catch up to Xian Zongfeng. He could only make his last attack. Burning sky with wind and fire. Feng Hu Qianyu furiously roared. Immediately after, he violently swung his sword. Immediately, an endless amount of sword intent condensed in an instant. A huge sword shadow that was tens of thousands of meters long appeared in the sky. It was like a rainbow burning with blazing flames as it charged towards Xian Zongfeng. Xian Zongfeng was 10,000 meters away, but he could already feel the endless sword pressure. His face slightly changed, and the wings on his back flapped. Immediately, a layer of snow-white protective shield appeared on his body and suddenly activated, covering his entire body. Xian Zongfeng knew that if he could survive this attack, he would escape with his life. If he died, then everything would be over. Chapter 2026. Boom! Feng Hu Qianyu's last strike pierced through the sky and pressed down on Xian Zongfeng. The huge sword shadow was like a fire dragon, rolling in the sky. It was as if the heaven and earth were burning. Boundless sword intent and flames filled the air, blazing and violent. Feng Hu Qianyu used all his strength in this strike, determined to kill Xian Zongfeng. Strangely, Xian Zongfeng did not even look back as he continued to run without looking back. Nie Tian noticed this and his expression changed. He thought to himself, Xian Zongfeng is not fighting back. Is he scared out of his wits? In his opinion, if Xian Zongfeng turned around and attacked, he might have a chance to survive. However, he was just waiting for death if he kept running. It was impossible to resist Feng Hu Qianyu's strike with his martial body. He's not scared out of his wits. He's just very confident in his defense. Fat Cat's voice was heard. Defense? What defense? Nie Tian was stunned. He saw that there was a pure white halo around Xian Zongfeng's body. However, he was very confused. Could the seemingly thin halo really block Feng Huqian Yu's strike? Feng Huqian Yu was a legendary swordsman. One could imagine how powerful his strike was. Just when Nie Tian was confused, the huge sword shadow in the sky suddenly descended and landed on Xian Zongfeng's body. At this moment, a strange scene happened. Rumble! The huge flaming sword shadow fell down and actually pierced through Xian Zongfeng's body. The huge sword shadow was torn apart by the light shield around Xian Zongfeng, and an ear-piercing sound was heard in the air. Humph, it's not that easy to kill me. Xian Zongfeng chuckled. With a flap of his wings, his figure disappeared into the horizon. Feng Huqian Yu watched Xian Zongfeng escape. His face froze and his mouth opened wide. After a long time, he roared, "Impossible! Impossible!" What happened just now was completely impossible in Feng Huqian Yu's eyes. He was very confident in his sword will. One sword strike was enough to destroy a mountain range. However, even so, his strongest sword could not break through the thin layer of shield that Xian Zongfeng had condensed. It was too strange and he could not accept it. Feng Huqian Yu wasn't the only one who couldn't believe it. The others were also stunned and only reacted after a dozen seconds. Am I seeing things? What just happened? What was the barrier around Sword Lord Wu's body? Why is he so strong? What kind of power is that? How could it possibly block Master Qian Yu's sword? It's too scary. What a strange halo barrier. Who is Sword Lord Wu? How can he have such power? The crowd discussed among themselves, their shocked eyes revealing the shock in their hearts at the moment. No one had expected that the final sword strike of the wind flame thousand feathers would actually have such an outcome. At this moment, Nie Dao was also astonished. He did not understand what was going on. Nie Tian was stunned for a moment before he finally reacted and asked, "Fat, what happened just now? What is the halo shield around Xian Zongfeng's body?" Just now, Fat Cat said that Xian Zongfeng was not scared out of his wits, but he was very confident in his defense. At this moment, Nie Tian finally understood how powerful Xian Zongfeng's halo shield was. However, he was completely unable to understand how that seemingly weak halo barrier could be this powerful, to actually be able to block Firestorm Qian Yu's sword. If I'm not mistaken, that halo shield should be the legendary guardian of the elves. The Fat Cat's eyes narrowed as she said solemnly, "Elven guardian?" Nie Tian was stunned. He had no idea what Fat Cat was talking about. The Fat Cat nodded and explained, "The elven protection is an innate magical ability of the elves, and it will become stronger as they grow older. It was rumored that the elven protection was a protective power that came from the bloodline. It was very holy and was close to the holy power. However, the spirit protection can only be used once in a lifetime. After using it, the protective power within the spirit's body will disappear." Wait a second. Nie Tian interrupted Fat Cat and asked, "Fat, you said that the elven protection is an innate magical ability of the elves. Is Xian Zongfeng an elf?" According to Fat Cat, the elven protection could only be activated by the elves. However, Xian Zongfeng was clearly a human, so how could he use the elven protection? Yes. The Fat Cat nodded and said, "Since Xian Zongfeng can activate the elven protection, it proves that he is an elf. The reason why his appearance and aura are like that of a human might be because he used some kind of concealment method." Nie Tian was dumbfounded and his face went blank. Xian Zongfeng was Sword Master Wu of the Shunwu Sword Pagoda. He must have experienced a lot to be able to reach this position today. Under such a complicated experience, he was able to hide his true identity. His patience and perseverance were absolutely terrifying. Who was Xian Zongfeng? What kind of secret was he hiding? Nie Tian couldn't help but take a deep breath. He had underestimated Xian Zongfeng all this time, thinking that the latter was only an ambitious swordsman. He didn't expect Xian Zongfeng's true identity to be an elf. It seemed that there must be a huge secret behind him. The elves had been wiped out by the Dragon Rebel clan in antiquity times. Most of the elves who had survived were slaves. Nie Tian had run into fairies back in the planar world, but he hadn't seen a single one in this realm. Humans had never allowed elves to exist. There were many experts in the territory, so it was almost impossible for elves to exist. One had to admit that Xian Zongfeng was indeed different. He had been able to hide in the human world for so long and become Sword Master Wu of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. Xian Zongfeng must have had a purpose for hiding in the Shenwu Sword Pagoda, but now that he had escaped, it would be difficult to find out his purpose. Fenghua Qianyu was really unlucky. He had finally found the person who killed his father, but the latter had escaped. Damn it! The wind flame thousand feathers stood upright in midair and let out a furious roar. All the hair on its body stood on end, making it seem like an enraged lion. Just at that moment, Fenghua Qianyu seemed to have thought of something. He suddenly turned around and took a step forward. His figure arrived before the crowd. He looked at one person with a pair of cold eyes and coldly called out that person's name, Gongsun Xingji. Xian Zongfeng had escaped, but Gongsun Xingji was still here. Chapter 2027. Xian Zongfeng and Gongsun Xingji were Fenghua Qianyu's must-kill target. In Fenghua Qianyu's opinion, Xian Zongfeng was the one who killed his father directly and Gongsun Xingji indirectly. Although Fenghua Qianyu had killed Xian Zongfeng, wouldn't Gongsun Xingji, who didn't know about it, be held responsible? Xian Zongfeng had been lurking in the Shenwu Sword Pagoda for a long time, but Gongsun Xingji hadn't discovered him. As the owner of the Divine Sword, he couldn't escape from his responsibility. If Gongsun Xingji had discovered Xian Zongfeng earlier, Fenghua Qianyu wouldn't have died. This was the reason why Fenghua Qianyu killed Gongsun Xingji. Gongsun Xingji, what else do you have to say? Fenghua Qianyu stared at Gongsun Xingji and said coldly. Gongsun Xing's eyes trembled, his face stiff and embarrassed. With a pained expression, he said, I have nothing to say. Do it. Gongsun Xingji didn't explain anything because he felt that he was indeed responsible for this. It didn't matter if he knew or not. Fenghua Qianyu had died in the Shenwu Sword Pagoda, so Gongsun Xingji couldn't escape the blame. Gongsun Xingji couldn't fight anymore. He had been injured by Jiang Lai and was in a bad state. In fact, even if he hadn't been injured by Jiang Lai, he wouldn't have been Fenghua Qianyu's match. Unless he didn't have the Forbidden Blood Seal, he might have been able to fight Fenghua Qianyu. But now there was only one path in front of him, and that was to wait for death. Gongsun Xingji, I respect you as a master of the sword. Do it yourself. Fenghua Qianyu calmed down a lot when he saw how calm Gongsun Xingji was, but he wouldn't let him go just because he was calm. He was willing to let Gongsun Xingji die in a dignified manner. That was the greatest mercy he could offer. Thank you. Gongsun Xingji nodded with a bitter smile. To think that he, the dignified divine sword master, who was once the #1 swordsman in the 9 regions, had actually fallen to the point of being forced to commit suicide. Wait! Just as Gongsun Xingji was about to kill himself with his sword intent, a voice rang out. In the next instant, the figure of Guiwu Quangsha appeared beside Gongsun Xingji. Guiwu Quangsha had always been by Nie Tian's side. At this moment, seeing that Gongsun Sheng was about to commit suicide, he naturally couldn't sit by and do nothing. Brother Guiwu. Seeing Guiwu Quangsha, Gongsun Sheng couldn't help but smile bitterly and shake his head. He knew that Ghost Marshal Quangsha and the Wind-Fire Twin Cities were once good friends. However, he did not know the relationship between Ghost Marshal Quangsha and the Wind-Fire Thousand Feathers. Qianyu, your father's death has nothing to do with Swordmaster Gongsun. Why must you kill him? Guiwu Sha looked at the wind flame Qian Yu with an agitated expression. The person before him was once his disciple. However, this disciple of his had already reached the pinnacle of the sword Dao. He did not know how much weight his words still carried in the wind flame Qian Yu's heart. Teacher, you're the one who raised me and taught me sword arts, leading me on the path of the sword Dao. In the wind flame Qian Yu's heart, your position is the same as my father's. Looking at Guiwu Sha deeply bowed. His attitude was extremely respectful. I'm willing to do anything for you. Even if you want to take my life, I'm willing. The wind flame Qian Yu's expression was solemn. Shortly after, he turned his gaze towards Gongsun Xing and said, however, Gongsun Xing is the one who caused my father's death. I can't let him continue to live. Guiwu Sha's gaze slightly narrowed. He did not expect that the wind flame Qian Yu would be so respectful towards him. However, at the same time, he also did not expect that the wind flame Qian Yu would be so determined to kill Gongsun Xing. Gongsun Xing was stunned for a moment. He did not expect that the wind flame Qian Yu and the wind flame Qian Yu would actually have a master-disciple relationship. However, even if that was the case, the pleading of the wind flame Qian Yu was useless. Guiwu Sha sighed and did not say anything else. He had already tried his best. After all, he could not force the wind flame Qian Yu to let Gongsun Xing off. Wait! However, at this moment another voice rang out. Shortly after, Nie Tian's figure walked over. Nie Dao stood behind Nie Tian and walked over. However, he looked at Gongsun Xing with a somewhat strange gaze. After all, the relationship between the two of them was still stiff. The wind flame Qian Yu's gaze slightly narrowed. He looked at Nie Tian and said cold, Nie Tian, what do you want to say? Previously, the wind flame Qian Yu had secretly paid attention to the battle royale of the quarterfinals. He noticed that Nie Tian had the opportunity to kill the wind flame ice great, but he gave the latter a chance to live. This was also the reason why he was willing to let Nie Tian speak. Lord Windflame, Lord Divine Sword Master is not the person who killed your father. You only want to kill him to vent the anger in your heart. You have to think carefully. Is it really worth it to do this? Nie Tian looked at the wind flame Qian Yu and said solemnly, whether it is worth it or not, this is my own business. It has nothing to do with others. The wind flame Qian Yu's expression clearly stiffened. Shortly after, he looked coldly at Nie Tian and said, Nie Tian, this matter has nothing to do with you. I advise you not to meddle in other people's business. The wind flame Qian Yu was very grateful that Nie Tian did not kill the wind flame ice great. However, this did not mean that he would listen to Nie Tian's words. He was definitely going to kill Gongsun Xing today. No one could stop him. Since Brother Gongsun is not the person who killed your father, you still want to force him to commit suicide. Isn't this killing the innocent? At this moment, Nie Dao, who was at the side, finally spoke. He looked at the wind flame Qian Yu with a gloomy expression. Among everyone present, the only one who had the ability to stop the wind flame Qian Yu was Nie Dao. Wind and Cloud Alliance Master, could it be that you also want to meddle in other people's business? The wind flame Qian Yu was not afraid at all. He looked at Nie Dao cold. His gaze was extremely stern, as if saying, if you meddle in other people's business, I don't mind fighting with you. At this moment, Gongsun Xing's expression changed slightly. He looked at Nie Dao and wanted to say something. However, he did not say anything. He and Nie Dao were once good friends. However, the two of them had a falling out because of the matter between Nie Fenghua and Third Lady Gongsun. Since then, they had never met each other. He did not expect that Nie Dao would stand out and speak for him at this moment. After so many years, Gongsun Xing no longer cared about what happened in the past. However, he did not have a suitable opportunity to meet Nie Dao. Now that the two of them met, it was an opportunity to break the ice. Nie Dao turned to look at Gongsun Xing and smiled. Then, he said to the wind flame Qianyu, "Brother Gongsun is my friend. How can I watch him be forced to kill himself?" The wind flame Qianyu's expression changed instantly. He immediately became cold and said in a deep voice, "Wind and Cloud Alliance Master, it seems that you really want to interfere in this matter. So what if I interfere?" Nie Dao also became tough at this moment. He said in a cold voice, "Since I, Nie Dao, am here today, no one can kill Gongsun Xing." Humph. Is that so? The wind flame Qianyu's eyes were as deep as water. He stared at Nie Dao and said coldly, "It seems that I will have to experience the Wind and Cloud Alliance Master's strength today." The wind flame Qianyu was not afraid of Nie Dao at all. Today, no one could stop him from killing Gongsun Xing. Not even the Wind and Cloud Alliance Master. Chapter 2028. High up in the sky, Nie Dao and Firestorm Thousand Feathers were at each other's throat. The atmosphere instantly became tense. Nie Tian looked embarrassed. He didn't expect things to turn out this way. He wasn't worried about Nie Dao's safety. In his opinion, although Firestorm Thousand Feathers was strong, he couldn't hurt Nie Dao. On the contrary, if Firestorm Thousand Feathers were to fight Nie Dao to the death, the latter might hurt him if he was enraged. However, Firestorm Thousand Feathers was bent on killing Gongsun Xing. No one could stop him. The battle before him was unavoidable. "Divine Sword Master, let's retreat." Nie Tian nodded and retreated with Gongsun Xing and the others. The eyes of the onlookers became heated at this moment. The leader of Fengyun Alliance and Xingtian Alliance didn't fight, but the leader of Fengyun Alliance and Tower Leader Thousand Feathers were going to fight. Everyone retreated 10,000 meters away from the two in the sky. "Make your move." High up in the sky, Nie Dao looked at Firestorm Thousand Feathers and said coldly, "All right." Fenghui Qian, you didn't hold back. With a low roar, the sword aura around him soared like a mountain and an ocean. Instantly, the space was pulled taut by the sword intent. Without the slightest hesitation, he slashed out with his sword, and an enormous sword image charged towards Nie Dao. Nie Tian's lips curled up. His face was very calm. He struck with his palm. A terrifying palm shadow appeared like a mountain. Rumble! In the next moment, the palm and sword collided. The void shook violently. Boundless power exploded and spread in all directions, wreaking havoc in the space. Firestorm Thousand Feathers' figure moved slightly and was forced to take a few steps back. On the other hand, Nie Dao was as steady as Mount Tai. He didn't move at all. This was the first time they fought. It was obvious that Firestorm Thousand Feathers' strength was slightly weaker than Nie Dao's. Nie Dao smiled and said loudly, "The legendary swordsman is only SOSO." Although he said so, Nie Dao was very surprised. Although the sword strike just now did not injure him, it made him feel threatened. Fortunately, he was a god-restraining fetus, so his martial body was far stronger than that of a martial artist of the same level. Otherwise, he would have been injured by that sword. A legendary swordsman was, after all, very strong. If the Windfire Thousand Feathers was also a cultivator with a strong bloodline, the one who would be retreating would be Nie Dao. When the crowd saw this, their expressions changed slightly, and they could not help but discuss. The Wind and Cloud Alliance Master is indeed someone who stands at the pinnacle of the 9 regions. His strength is stronger than Tower Master Qianyu's. That might not be the case. Master Thousand Feather has already exhausted a lot of his energy in his fight against Sword Master Wu. It's already not easy for him to fight against Alliance Master Wind and Cloud. The battle has only just begun. It's still hard to say who will win and who will lose. There were people in the crowd who believed that Nie Dao was stronger, but there were also people who felt that the Wind Flame Thousand Feathers still had a chance of winning. Arrogant. When the Fenghui Qianyu heard Nie Dao's provocative words, his face couldn't help but change. The sword aura on his body actually rose explosively once again, and then he fiercely slashed down. This sword's aura was even fiercer and sharper than the previous one. It seemed that the wind flame thousand feathers was really angry. He originally did not want to be enemies with Nie Dao, but at this moment, in order to kill Gong Sun Xingji, he could only go all out. Nie Dao stood in the void, facing the wind flame thousand feathers attack. He similarly slapped out with his palm, but the difference was that his palm contained the power of the spirit confining fetus. Rumble! In the void, the palm shadow and the sword shadow collided, and a loud explosion erupted. An even more terrifying airwave was released, and the space was surging. The crowd felt the terrifying aura and they all retreated. And in the sky, the wind flame thousand feathers figure was forced to retreat again. As for Nie Dao, he was still like an old tree, and did not move an inch. Damn it! Seeing this, the wind flame thousand feathers suddenly roared, and immediately released an even more violent sword aura, and slashed at Nie Dao one after another. But unfortunately, Nie Dao was like a giant, standing there, and no matter how violent the storm was, he did not move. The wind flame thousand feathers consecutively attacked more than a dozen times, but he could not move Nie Dao, and this caused him to become irritable. The crowd looked at the scene in the sky, and their eyes could not help but tremble. No one thought that Nie Dao's martial arts foundation would be so deep. Just this terrifying defense alone was enough to let him stand at the peak. I didn't expect Grandpa to be so powerful. The spirit confining fetus is indeed terrifying. Nie Tian watched from afar, and he could not help but exclaim in his heart. He naturally knew that the reason why Nie Dao was so powerful was because of the spirit confining fetus. You call this terrifying? At the same time, the fat cat's voice was heard, but with a hint of disdain. Your fiend god nascent fetus is much more terrifying than the spirit confining fetus. You just don't know it yourself. Is that so? Nie Tian could not help but ask, and he laughed. Of course. The fat cat let out a strange cry, and then did not say anything else. A few days ago, when Nie Tian lost control, the power of 9,000 fiend gods had all awakened. Even Gong Sun Xingji was not his opponent. It had to be mentioned that Nie Tian was only an early overgod at that time. And the fat cat knew that the fiend god nascent fetus did not just contain the power of 9,000 fiend gods. There was an even more terrifying power that had yet to awaken. The fiend god nascent fetus was known as the greatest ancient taboo. No one knew just how terrifying it was. Guiwu Guangxiao was rather nervous. He was very worried that Nie Dao would injure the wind flame thousand feathers. Wind flame thousand feathers, if this is all you have, it's impossible for you to defeat I. At this moment, Nie Dao's voice rang out in the sky. It seemed extremely domineering. Really? The wind flame thousand feathers' eyes narrowed slightly. He could tell that Nie Dao's martial body was just too powerful. Combined with the power of the spirit confining fetus, he would not be able to injure Nie Dao even if he struck out 100 times. Wind and Cloud Alliance Master, since you insist on saving Gong Sun Xingji, prepare to pay the price. Suddenly, the wind flame thousand feathers expression changed. He suddenly released a very strange aura. His body surged with a scarlet sword intent. The space was actually filled with a bloody smell. Huh! Nie Tian noticed that the aura of the wind flame thousand feathers was not right. His expression changed. Oh no, he's going to use the power of the blood-weeping sword infant. At the same time, the fat cat cried out. His face was actually a little frightened. The wind flame thousand feathers was really going all out this time. Once he used the power of the blood-weeping sword infant, even if he could heavily injure Nie Dao, he would become extremely weak. When he was fighting against Xian Zongfeng, the wind flame thousand feathers did not use the blood-weeping sword infant. At this moment, he was really going all out. Nie Tian's brows furrowed. He immediately sensed that the aura of the wind flame thousand feathers was several times stronger than before. What a powerful aura! The crowd also felt the change of the wind flame thousand feathers aura and could not help but cry out. Is he going all out? Nie Dao was the closest to the wind flame thousand feathers. Of course, he could feel the change of the latter's aura. He could not help but frown and his face became serious. He only wanted to stop the wind flame thousand feathers from killing Gongsun Xingji. He did not want to fight to the death with his opponent. However, looking at the current posture of the wind flame thousand feathers, he was forcing Nie Dao to go all out. Since it's like this, then don't blame I. Nie Dao's face sank. Immediately after, his body slightly shook. Circles of golden halos were released from his body. It was extremely dazzling in the space. Chapter 2029. In order to kill Gongsun Xingji, the Fenghua Thousand Feather decided to risk everything. He decided to use the power of the Blood-Tier Sword Infant. His actions also forced Nie Dao into a situation where he had to fight with his full strength. In the sky, the presences of the Fenghua Thousand Feather and Nie Dao skyrocketed. The two of them were like two huge whirlpools in the ocean, churning and surging wildly. They were only waiting for the next moment to collide. It would be an extremely horrifying sight. The eyes of the crowd constantly trembled. They did not blink at all. No one wanted to miss the most interesting scene. One was the leader of the Wind and Cloud Alliance, while the other was the leader of the Thousand Feather Pavilion. One was an expert at the peak of the Way of the Martial, while the other was a swordsman at the peak of the Way of the Sword. It was rare to see such a frightening scene of two people fighting with their lives on the line. Oh no! Nie Tian's heart suddenly sank when he saw this from afar. His expression changed drastically. He knew that the Fenghua Thousand Feather and Nie Dao would fight with their lives on the line in the next moment, but this was something he did not want to see the most. Nie Dao was his grandfather. He obviously did not want him to be injured. As for the Fenghua Thousand Feather, he did not seem to be an evil person based on what he had done after appearing. Nie Tian did not want to see either Nie Dao or the Fenghua Thousand Feather injured. And judging from Fat Cat's reaction, Nie Tian was unsure just how powerful the Fenghua Thousand Feather would be after activating the Blood-Tier Sword Infant. Gongsun Xingji and Guiwu Guangsha were extremely embarrassed as well. They were extremely nervous. They knew that a horrifying scene was about to happen, so their hearts were in their throat. Nie Tian, think of a way to stop them. At this moment, Fat Cat's voice rang out. She was extremely anxious. Nie Tian was stunned. His eyes could not help but tremble. Of course he wanted to stop them, but he did not have the strength to do so. Whether it was Nie Dao or the Fenghua Thousand Feather, they were both peak experts. Any one of them could kill him instantly. How could he, an over-god, stop them? Fat, is the Blood-Tier Sword Infant really that terrifying? Nie Tian asked suddenly. His voice even trembled. Very scary. Fat Cat's voice was equally nervous as she said, if the Wind Flame Thousand Feathers were to fight to the death with your grandfather, the most likely outcome would be the two of them perishing together. Mutual destruction? Nie Tian was taken aback, and beads of sweat instantly appeared on his forehead. His entire face froze. Mutual destruction. This result was too terrifying. This was a terrible result that Nie Tian didn't even dare to think about. No, we must stop them. In an instant, Nie Tian roared in his heart. Shortly after, his figure moved and the three forbidden arts were unleashed once again. He was like an arrow that had left the bow as he flew towards Nie Dao and the Wind Flame Thousand Plume. At the same time, he shouted with all his might, Alliance Master, Thousand Plume Pavilion Master, please stop. Nie Tian. Gongsun Xingji and Guiwu Guangsha's faces were originally filled with endless worry. Suddenly, they saw a figure rushing over. After gawking for a moment, they saw clearly that it was Nie Tian, causing their faces to change. Both of them cried out in their hearts at the same time, Nie Tian, does he want to die? Nie Dao and the Wind Flame Thousand Feathers were about to use their ultimate moves, but Nye Tian rushed over at this time. Wasn't he just courting death? Not to mention that Nye Tian was courting death. Even a peak paramount god like Gui Wuquang Sha would most likely die if he rushed over at this time. Nye Tian. Nye Dao's entire body's aura rose to the extreme. He was ready to fight the wind flame thousand feathers head-on. However, when he suddenly heard Nye Tian's voice, he turned to look, and his face instantly sank. He also didn't expect that Nye Tian would actually rush over as if his life depended on it. Alliance Master, you're distracted. Wind Flame Thousand Feathers' eyes slightly trembled. He suddenly let out a low roar, and immediately the sword aura around him rose to the extreme. The long sword in his hand directly slashed down. Originally, Wind Flame Thousand Feathers didn't want to take advantage of the situation. This kind of action when the opponent was distracted was also something he despised. However, he really wanted to kill Gongsun Sheng. Therefore, even if he had to do something despicable at this moment, he wouldn't hesitate. Damn it! Nye Dao suddenly felt an incomparably powerful sword pressure coming towards him. His gloomy expression instantly changed. He let out a low roar, and the golden light around his body crazily surged, condensing into a golden shield, covering him in the void. Originally, Nye Dao wanted to fight the Wind Flame Thousand Feathers head-on. However, with the appearance of Nye Tian, he had to passively defend. Otherwise, if the two of them clashed, the waves of energy generated would be something that Nye Tian wouldn't be able to withstand. At the same time that Nye Dao activated the God-binding shield, he turned around and struck out with his palm. A continuous wave of energy pierced through the air, and actually bombarded towards Nye Tian. Of course, he didn't want to hurt Nye Tian. Instead, he wanted to prevent Nye Tian from approaching, and let Nye Tian get as far away from the center of the collision as possible. Nye Tian was in midair, and suddenly felt a spring wind and rain. A soft and boundless energy appeared, making it impossible for him to approach. Instead, he could only quickly retreat. He suddenly thought of something, and his expression instantly changed. In order to save Nye Tian, Nye Dao gave up on attacking, and chose to passively defend. This was extremely disadvantageous to him. If the Wind Flame Thousand Feathers sword were to land, Nye Dao definitely wouldn't be able to withstand it. When he thought of this, Nye Tian's eyes suddenly trembled, and his expression was incomparably shocked. Just now, he was too impulsive, and directly rushed over. Nye Dao cared a lot about him, but the Wind Flame Thousand Feathers couldn't possibly care about his life. The eyes of the crowd suddenly trembled at this moment. No one had expected such a dramatic scene to occur in the battle. However, right at that moment another variable occurred. Wind Flame Thousand Feathers, stop! Right when the Firestorm Thousand Feathers sword was about to descend, a clear and impatient voice resounded out. After that, a figure appeared in the sky like a bolt of lightning, swift to the limit, and actually appeared between Nye Dao and the Firestorm Thousand Feathers. So fast! The sudden scene caused Nye Tian's expression to change, and he exclaimed in his heart. However, when he saw the figure that suddenly appeared, his expression became strange, and he said in astonishment, "Third Lady Gongsun?" Nye Tian had never expected that the person who had suddenly appeared would be Third Lady Gongsun. Third Lady Gongsun, why would she appear at this time? Girl! At this moment, the Wind Flame Thousand Feathers also saw Third Lady Gongsun's face clearly, and was also startled. His eyes suddenly trembled, and his expression was extremely shocked as he shouted out an unexpected name. Girl! The Wind Flame Thousand Feathers actually called Third Lady Gongsun a girl. It was obvious that the Wind Flame Thousand Feathers and Third Lady Gongsun knew each other, and their relationship was not ordinary. Quick dodge! In the next instant, the Wind Flame Thousand Feathers suddenly reacted, and his aura immediately weakened. He let out a strange cry, and his expression became terrified. He never expected Third Lady Gongsun to appear at this time. If his sword were to land, Third Lady Gongsun would definitely be killed on the spot. Unfortunately, it was too late for him to withdraw his sword. At most, he would directly weaken the force of the sword. Chapter 20:30. Nie Dao's gaze suddenly trembled. How could he have imagined that Third Lady Gongsun would actually appear at this moment? In an instant, Nie Dao's body shook without hesitation. Golden light gushed out from his body. The god-restraining shield turned into endless light that surged towards Third Lady Gongsun and instantly enveloped her. It was also at this moment that the firestorm Thousand Feathers sword descended with a loud bang. Rumble! The enormous sword shadow bombarded the golden light shield. A loud explosion sounded in the air. Heaven and earth trembled along with it. The entire sky was filled with extremely violent power. Boom! Crack, crack, crack. Almost at the same time, the sword shadow and the light shield in the air started to crumble. Waves of qi spread out and filled the air. Nie Tian saw from afar that the air was filled with terrifying qi waves. He actually couldn't see anything. Nie Dao, the firestorm Thousand Feathers, and Third Lady Gongsuan's figures were engulfed by the terrifying qi waves. When the crowd saw this scene, they couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. Their eyes trembled uncontrollably. No one would have thought that such a shocking battle would actually have such a huge change. Girl. Just at this moment, a sword aura suddenly appeared, forcibly sweeping away the waves of qi in the air. The wind flame Thousand Feathers recklessly rushed towards Third Lady Gongsun. His entire person seemed to have gone mad, his expression one of extreme agony. Nie Dao frowned. His body trembled slightly. Golden light gushed out from his body and dispersed all the qi waves in the air. When he saw the firestorm Thousand Feathers suddenly rushing towards Third Lady Gongsun, he couldn't help but be enraged. He angrily roared, "Bastard, get out of my way!" As he roared, Nie Dao struck out with his palm. A vast and mighty palm shadow suddenly rumbled down towards the firestorm Thousand Feathers. However, at this moment, the firestorm Thousand Feathers was like an idiot. He didn't put up any defense and only rushed towards Third Lady Gongsun. Bang! With a muffled sound, the firestorm Thousand Feathers figure was directly sent flying. He was forced to retreat for thousands of meters. However, after he stabilized his figure, his eyes were as red as blood. Then, a pair of sword wings appeared on his back, and he unexpectedly rushed towards Third Lady Gongsun again. At this moment, Third Lady Gongsun was unconscious. Her body was covered in blood, and her aura was extremely weak. She was like a withered leaf in the wind, on the verge of shattering at any moment. Nie Dao and the Wind Flame Thousand Feathers were naturally able to withstand that level of impact, but Third Lady Gongsun was unable to. Courting death. Nie Dao couldn't help but let out a low roar when he saw that the Wind Flame Thousand Feathers actually still dared to approach Third Lady Gongsun, and his eyes revealed killing intent. His aura rose violently, and he actually intended to annihilate the Wind Flame Thousand Feathers with a single palm strike. However, at that moment, Nie Tian's voice resounded in Nie Dao's mind. It was Nie Tian's voice. "Grandpa, don't kill him." Nie Dao was stunned for a moment, but he still stopped. Lass! Feng Huiqian Yu's figure was extremely fast, and he directly arrived at Third Lady Gongsuan's side. Looking at the latter who was already covered in blood, he actually burst into tears. Seeing this, Nie Dao was stunned. He had no idea what was going on. Tower Master Thousand Feathers, the #1 swordsman in the 9 major realms, actually burst into tears like a child in front of so many people. This was too strange. What is going on? Seeing this scene, the crowd was even more baffled. Was Feng Huiqian Yu crazy? Clearly, Feng Huiqian Yu wasn't injured, so why did he suddenly burst into tears at this moment, and in front of so many people? Gongsun Xingji and Guiwu Quangsha's figures also rushed over at this moment, and seeing the scene in front of them, they were also stunned. They didn't even know that Feng Huiqian Yu and Third Lady Gongsun knew each other, so they had no idea what was going on. Only Nie Tian frowned, and he had already guessed everything in his heart. Previously, when Third Lady Gongsun suddenly appeared, Nie Tian noticed that Feng Huiqian Yu's expression had completely changed. That gaze, that reaction, and that address of "lass" all indicated one thing: Feng Huiqian Yu and Third Lady Gongsun were a pair of lovers. At this moment, Nie Tian understood everything. Back then, Third Lady Gongsun had an engagement with Nie Tian's father, Nie Fenghua, but Nie Fenghua left on the day of the wedding. Nie Fenghua left not because of anything else, but because Third Lady Gongsun had someone she loved, but it wasn't him. Perhaps Nie Fenghua's feelings for Third Lady Gongsun were like siblings, so he chose to leave. Third Lady Gongsun told Nie Tian everything, but she didn't say who the person she loved was. But now, Nie Tian knew that the person Third Lady Gongsun loved was none other than Master Qianyu, Feng Huiqianyu. Nie Tian had wondered what kind of person Third Lady Gongsun had told him about Nie Fenghua, and what kind of person would make Third Lady Gongsun leave. With Nie Fenghua's talent, he wasn't an ordinary person, and he wouldn't lose to anyone. But Nie Tian would never have thought that the person who was in love with Third Lady Gongsun was actually Feng Huiqianyu. But now that he thought about it, everything made sense. Third Lady Gongsun would rather let Nie Fenghua bear the crime of running away from the wedding than say Feng Huiqianyu's name. She must have known about the grudge between Feng Huiqianyu and the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. Once Feng Huiqianyu's name was revealed, it would cause Qianyu Tower and the Shenwu Sword Pagoda to fight to the death. Feng Huiqianyu used to be a member of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda, so it wasn't strange that he knew Third Lady Gongsun. But judging from how Feng Huiqianyu addressed Third Lady Gongsun, he didn't know her real identity. "Girl, wake up, wake up!" At this moment, Feng Huiqianyu hugged Third Lady Gongsun in his arms and cried like a child. But Third Lady Gongsun's aura was weakening bit by bit, about to disappear at any moment. "Feng Huiqianyu, let go of my daughter!" Gongsun Xing came to his senses and stepped forward, shouting. Feng Huiqianyu raised his head in shock. He really didn't know Third Lady Gongsun's real identity. "Master Qianyu, let me take a look." Nie Tian arrived. Now wasn't the time to explain. Saving Third Lady Gongsun was more important. Feng Huiqianyu looked at Nie Tian and was stunned. "Feng Huiqianyu, if you don't want her to die, then get out of the way," Nie Tian said. Feng Huiqianyu stood up and let go of Third Lady Gongsun. Nie Tian came to Third Lady Gongsun and used his divine sense to check. Her aura was very weak and could disappear at any moment. Oh no! Nie Tian's face was gloomy. He released the power of the Terra Source and poured it into Third Lady Gongsun's body. But after absorbing the power of the Terra Source, Third Lady Gongsun's condition didn't improve. Her aura was still very weak. After several battles, Nie Tian didn't have much power of the Terra Source left in his body. Plus, his Terra Source was only life energy and couldn't bring the dead back to life. Third Lady Gongsun's injuries were too serious. Even the Terra Source couldn't help her recover. Chapter 2031. Nie Tian, how is San Yang? Gongsun Xing saw that Nie Tian's face was getting paler and paler, and his face became gloomy. Tears welled up in his eyes and finally fell. He only had this one daughter, and she was the person he cared about the most in his life. Yet, he had to watch her die right in front of his eyes. The pain in his heart was unimaginable. Nie Tian's face became paler and paler, but he did not give up. He continued to overdraft the Terra Source in his body. Nie Tian, give up. With your current strength, you can't save her. At this moment, Fat Cat's voice was heard, and his face became very gloomy. Nie Tian's expression flickered, and his tense nerves immediately relaxed. He really did not want to give up, but his current strength was limited, and he could not save Third Lady Gongsun's life. "Feng Huiqianyu, you bastard, you killed my daughter!" Seeing that Nie Tian had suddenly stopped, Gong Sun Xing seemed to have gone mad. He rushed to Feng Huiqianyu, stretched out his palm, and slapped the latter's face. At this moment, Feng Huiqianyu was like a walking corpse. He allowed Gong Sun Xing to slap his face again and again, but he did not retaliate at all. He had killed the person he loved with his own hand. His heart was in more pain than Gong Sun Xing's. Feng Huiqianyu seemed to have lost all his faith. He stood there in a daze and did not react at all. At this moment, to him, revenge, pursuit of martial arts, and grudges were all meaningless. If he could save Third Lady Gongsuan's life, he was willing to pay any price. At this moment, the regret in his heart was like an uncontrollable river, bursting its banks. Unfortunately, Third Lady Gongsun could not wake up. Her aura was weakening, and her life was quietly slipping away. Fat, is there really no other way? Nie Tian asked with a sorrowful expression. There's no other way. The Terra source in your body is too weak, and her life is slipping away too much. You can't save her. Fat Cat replied to Nie Tian, and his expression was gloomy. The atmosphere suddenly became oppressive and oppressive. Who would have thought that the final outcome would be like this? Nie Tian. At this moment, a voice suddenly rang out. Soon after, a figure appeared in front of everyone. Lord Earth Chief. Nie Tian abruptly raised his head. Seeing Earth Chief and Cher appear, he couldn't help but sigh and directly said, I have some matters to attend to right now. Let's talk about our matters later. Previously, Earth Chief had told Nie Tian that after the evil edge sword duel, he would personally look for Nie Tian to discuss Cher. Nie Tian was supposed to deal with Cher after the evil edge sword meet, but he couldn't just walk away now. Nie Tian, do you want to save her? Earth Chief did not leave. Instead, he smiled faintly, the corners of his mouth curling up slightly. Nie Tian was stunned for a moment and looked at Earth Chief with a strange expression. You can save her. Gongsun Xing and Feng Huiqianyu reacted at the same time. They immediately looked at Earth Chief with blazing eyes. Yes. Earth Chief smiled faintly and gave a definite answer. Lord Earth Chief, please save her. Gongsun Xing and Feng Huiqianyu spoke at the same time. Their originally murky eyes were filled with anticipation. If Earth Chief could save Third Lady Gongsun Xing and Feng Huiqianyu were willing to pay any price. However, Earth Chief smiled faintly and didn't care about the two. Instead, he turned his gaze to Nie Tian and said, Nie Tian, I want to make a deal with you. A deal? Nie Tian was stunned and asked, what deal? Earth Chief smiled faintly and said, I'll help you save someone, and you'll do something for me. What is it? Nie Tian was stunned again and asked. Earth Chief suddenly looked at Cher and said in a deep voice, Help Her Highness recover her memories. Hearing Earth Chief's words, Nie Tian's eyes couldn't help but tighten with a surprised expression. He originally thought that the inescapable net sealed Cher's memories and wanted to ask Earth Chief how to help Cher recover her memories. He didn't expect that the latter was also trying to recover Cher's memories. Nie Tian was very curious. How could he recover Cher's memories with his ability? Nie Tian, don't be surprised. I will explain some things to you. What you need to do now is to answer me. Are you willing to do this deal? Earth Chief guessed Nie Tian's doubts and said with a faint smile. Alright, I agree. Nie Tian didn't hesitate and immediately nodded in agreement. Very well. Earth Chief smiled faintly and looked at Gongsun Xing and Feng Huiqianyu, saying, Sword Lord Gongsun, there are too many people here. Let's return to Shenwu City first. Alright. Gongsun Xing came back to his senses and nodded heavily. He turned around and carried Third Lady Gongsun in his arms, heading straight for Shenwu City. Everyone followed him. A moment later, they arrived at a small courtyard in the Shenwu City Lord's mansion. Lord Earth Chief, what should we do now? Gongsun Xing put Third Lady Gongsun on the bed in the room and asked Earth Chief anxiously. All of you can leave the small courtyard. Without my order, No one is allowed to approach this small courtyard. Earth Chief smiled faintly and said calmly. This. Gongsun Sheng and Feng Huiqian, you were both stunned and a little worried. She is already in such a state. Are you still worried that I will harm her? Earth Chief smiled faintly and said half-jokingly. Lord Divine Sword Lord, Lord Tower Lord, let's go out first. Nie Tian nodded slightly and signaled everyone to leave. He knew that Earth Chief was from the ancient Ming clan and must have an unusual way to save people. He just didn't want others to see it. Everyone left the room and went outside the small courtyard. As soon as they arrived at the small courtyard, Gongsun Sheng angrily asked Feng Huiqianyu, "What is going on?" Feng Huiqianyu frowned. His mind was also in a daze. He didn't know what was going on. Why did the person he loved become Gongsun Sheng's daughter? After thinking for a while, Feng Huiqianyu finally said it. When he was in the Shenwu Sword Pagoda, he accidentally met Third Lady Gongsun, but he didn't know her real identity and only called her a girl. One day, he was ready to leave the Shenwu Sword Pagoda and wanted to take Third Lady Gongsun with him, but she refused. After crying and begging, he had no choice but to leave alone. But not long after, a man came to him with a baby. He told him that this was the child of him and Third Lady Gongsun. He also told him that Third Lady Gongsun had a difficult labor and passed away while giving birth. Feng Huiqianyu believed that person and accepted the child. He never went to see Third Lady Gongsun again. He never thought that he would see Third Lady Gongsun again today. What he regretted the most was the fact that he had personally killed Third Lady Gongsun. Chapter 2032. Gongsun Sheng couldn't accept that Feng Huiqianyu and Third Lady Gongsun had a child. He even doubted Feng Huiqianyu's words, because he had always thought that his daughter was innocent. Apart from a failed engagement, there was nothing else. However, he couldn't accept what had just happened. It's true. Feng Huiqianyu nodded solemnly. At this moment, Feng Huabinghong was beside him. He pointed at the latter and said, "This is my son with the little girl." Gongsun Sheng was stunned. When he looked at Feng Huiqianyu, his expression froze. How powerful was he? Naturally, he could sense this bloodline connection in an instant. The young swordsman in front of him, Feng Huiqianyu, was indeed related to him by blood. Gongsun Sheng had seen Feng Huiqianyu before, but he had only seen them from a distance of tens of thousands of meters. He didn't try to sense them, so he naturally didn't notice the blood relationship. Now that he was looking at Feng Huiqianyu, the blood relationship was even more vivid and intense. Nie Tian was also stunned. He only knew that Third Lady Gongsun and Feng Huiqianyu were lovers, but he didn't know that they had a child together. The reason why Gongsun Sheng didn't know about this was that Third Lady Gongsun had secretly given birth to the child under the pretext of cultivating in seclusion. Then, she sent the child to Feng Huiqianyu. After all, it was normal for warriors to cultivate in seclusion. It was common for warriors to cultivate in seclusion for hundreds or even thousands of years. If Third Lady Gongsun wanted to hide it, it would be difficult for Gongsun Sheng to find out. Nie Dao's expression was also very awkward at this moment. He had never thought that the truth of the matter would be like this. Although the engagement between Nie Fenghua and Third Lady Gongsun had been broken, Third Lady Gongsun was Nie Fenghua's fiancée. This kind of thing was not a glorious thing for Nie Fenghua or the Nie family. At this moment, Nie Tian saw through Nie Dao's thoughts, so he didn't stay silent anymore and said, "Grandpa, actually father already knew about Third Lady Gongsun. He chose to leave during the wedding, and he chose to take all the blame himself." Nie Dao was stunned once again, and his face stiffened once more. Gongsun Sheng was also stunned. No matter how stupid he was, he understood that Nie Fenghua had run away from the marriage. It was not Nie Fenghua who had wronged Third Lady Gongsun, but Third Lady Gongsun who had wronged Nie Fenghua. In other words, it wasn't the Nie clan's fault, but the Gongsun clans. Another thing that shocked him was that Nye Tian actually directly called Nye Dao grandpa, and also called Nye Fenghua father. In fact, he had long been aware of Nye Tian's identity. Back then, he already knew that Nye Tian was a god-fiend nascent embryo. However, when Nye Tian said it himself, he was still surprised. Brother Nye, Gongsun Xing frowned. He suddenly took a step forward and knelt in front of Nye Dao. He said in a deep voice, I was wrong about what happened back then. Seeing this, Fenghua Qian Yu also suddenly knelt down. This kneel was not only for his wrongdoings, but also for Nye Dao's sacrifice of his own life to save Third Lady Gongsun's. If it wasn't for Nye Dao, Third Lady Gongsun would have been killed by Fenghua Qian Yu. What are you two doing? Quickly get up. Nye Dao was stunned for a moment, but he immediately reacted and pulled Gongsun Sheng and Fenghua Qian Yu up. It had already happened for so long, what else could he say? Moreover, the Nye clan and the Gongsun clan had been enemies for so long. Now that the misunderstanding had been resolved, was he going to continue to hate Gongsun Sheng and continue the situation? Brother Gongsun, it's all in the past. We were friends before and we will still be friends in the future. Nye Dao smiled faintly and patted Gongsun Sheng's shoulder. Brother Nye. Gongsun Sheng was so emotional that tears streamed down his face. He was already speechless. Seeing this, the corner of Nye Tian's mouth curled up into a faint smile, feeling very gratified. Two old friends who had known each other for hundreds of thousands of years could finally bury the hatchet. How could he not be happy? Actually, Nye Tian felt that Nye Fenghua had left back then because of his sibling relationship with Third Lady Gongsun. Otherwise, he wouldn't have given up. Although Nye Tian had never met his father, he had heard some things from the Holy Mother of Jiuying. Therefore, he firmly believed that Nye Fenghua wasn't the kind of person who would give up so easily. Now that everyone had spoken up, the atmosphere was no longer so oppressive. Everyone, Nye Tian's identity is very special. I hope everyone can keep this a secret. At this moment, Nye Dao looked around at the crowd and said loudly. Of course. Everyone nodded and agreed. Although many people already knew Nye Tian's identity, it was better not to make it public. Everyone present was trustworthy. The secret of Nye Tian's god-fiend nascent embryo had to be kept a secret. After a moment, Earth Chief finally walked out of the room. He looked a little tired, but a faint smile hung at the corner of his mouth. Lord Earth Chief, how is Third Lady? Gongsun Xing stepped forward and asked somewhat anxiously. Earth Chief nodded with a smile and said, She's awake. You can go in and see her. Many thanks. Gongsun Xing thanked him and directly entered the room. Fenghua Qianyu and Fenghua Binghong followed him into the room. Nye Tian smiled faintly. They were reuniting with their family, so of course he wouldn't join in on the fun. It had to be said that Earth Chief, a member of the ancient Ming clan, had some tricks up his sleeve. Third Lady Gongsun had been seriously injured, but he had still been able to bring her back to life. Earth Chief came to Nye Tian's side and said with a smile, Nye Tian, I've saved her. It's time to talk about our matters. Sure. Nye Tian nodded in agreement. Nye Tian. Nye Dao stepped forward and wanted to say something, but Nye Tian reached out and stopped him. Nye Tian looked at Nye Dao and said, Grandfather, trust me. I can handle this. Alliance Leader Nye, this is a deal between me and Nye Tian. You don't have to interfere. Earth Chief laughed and said in a playful tone. Nye Tian thought for a moment and finally nodded. He knew that Nye Tian had his own path to walk, and as the alliance leader, he had his own responsibilities. He couldn't be by Nye Tian's side all the time, so some things were better left to Nye Tian. Nye Tian, let's find a quiet place, Earth Chieftain said with a faint smile. Then he blurred into motion and left.